Welcome to the Manufacturing Institute's second annual Diversity and Inclusion Summit. My name is AJ Jorgensen, and I'm the Vice President of Strategic Engagement, leading our D&I pillar at the Manufacturing Institute. Before we begin today, I want to do just a bit of housekeeping. On the right of your screen, you will see a chat box. I would love if you could all just kick off today's session by putting your name and organization in the chat. Throughout the conversation today, feel free to add comments, questions, and I will be monitoring that chat and trying to get to all of the questions that we can. You'll also find an agenda with all of our guest speakers' information. Finally, we encourage you to post on social media. Use the hashtag MFGTogether. Share your thoughts, key aha moments from the event, your company's participation. All the posts that use this hashtag will be filtered into the social media feed next to the chat tab. And I'd like to thank Arconic Foundation and Pella for supporting today's summit. Their support has allowed us to connect with hundreds of manufacturers this year to encourage their own D&I journeys. First, let's welcome Carolyn Lee, Executive Director of the Manufacturing Institute.
Thank you all for being here. This is such an important conversation and such an important discussion for us to have each and every day. As you know, the manufacturing industry is facing an enormous talent shortage. We have about 900,000 open jobs. It's something that I don't need to tell you all anything about because each and every day you guys are facing that and addressing that in your facilities all over the country. But one of the biggest opportunities for us in broadening our talent is broadening our talent workforce and the talent pipeline and bringing more people in, and therefore really looking at how we can do differently to engage different parts of the population to not only recruit but to retain that workforce. And frankly, unfortunately, manufacturers are a bit behind, but we are rapidly taking steps to catch up and to accelerate the creation of more inclusive environments that make our industry such an attractive place for people of all backgrounds. As you know, of course, the Manufacturing Institute is the workforce development and education partner of the National Association of Manufacturers here in the mothership today. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and empower the workforce of today and tomorrow. And we really do that through focusing on programs and initiatives focused on specific audiences, students, veterans, women, and workers, and underrepresented populations throughout all of those groups. The MI is leading D&I, putting in place plans that, and we've been doing this for the last several years, forming our advisory committee initially at the very beginning of 2019 based on work that AJ had led coming into 2018. And all of that was built on the long work that we've done in the women's and closing the gender gap. But we realized we really need to do more and focus on the broader population set. And that's where our work has really focused on all facets of diversity since we launched at the very beginning of 2020 with the public work. So since then, we've launched a monthly roundtable series featuring voices at the forefront of the ongoing work in industry, offering case studies. We really have worked hard. The team has done a tremendous job of making sure this is actionable information for people to take in and then take away to put into use in your own facilities. Each of the roundtables have focused on actionable best practices your company can adopt and the key steps that leading manufacturers are taking, because we know you all want to learn from one another, and making sure that we're building equitable and inclusive workplaces in the communities that you all work in. You'll also see online a collection of case studies and resources from thought leaders in manufacturing on the current state of D&I in manufacturing. I know we'll talk about that a little bit in just a little bit. And the pitfalls that we need to avoid as we work to create more inclusive workplaces and communities. Each of the resources, again, are focused on tangible actions your company can take to grow your inclusive and equitable culture, boosting talent, recruitment, and workforce retention. One thing that I'll point out is we've also really looked at how do we make sure you don't have to only have the full right? That you have the supersized package, but that there are small actionable steps that you can take so that you can really build the practice, you can build the learning and the muscle memory within your organization. And that really organizations of all sizes are able then to participate. It's not just you have to be a multinational who can have a whole team doing this. You can have one person who does this part of the time. And we're making sure that we're bringing all of that learning to the table. One of the things that we've done and helped with in the last year is the NAM's Pledge for Action and equal opportunity. Well, it's been long one of the NAM's 4 pillars. In the days after George Floyd's killing, the NAM leadership felt strongly that it was important for us to make a statement on behalf of the sector. And the Pledge for Action was a bold statement. It had many planks of commitments of what we were going to do to close the equity and opportunity gaps that exist in the country. But knowing that we couldn't just do a statement, we went further. And the board leadership, the board chair, NAM board chair, Mike Lamach, CEO and chairman at the time of Train Technologies, convened a task force on closing the opportunity gap that was led with the MI's support team, which recommended critical and overdue actions on behalf of the industry. That then produced a bold goal that the NAM announced in September of 2020, where we, on behalf of the industry, we committed to, by 2025, the goals were manufacturers commit to taking 50,000 tangible actions to increase equity and parity for underrepresented communities, creating 300,000 pathways to opportunities for Black people and people of color. In doing so, the ultimate goal is for manufacturing to reflect the diversity of the overall U.S. workforce by 2030. And we're proud to say that we will surpass this goal of 300,000 pathways. We already have, actually, and we're making huge strides towards the 50,000 actions. But as always, there is still more for us to do together. And that's what leads to many of the conversations we'll have today. And we'll talk about these tangible actions that can be simple. And again, it can be simple as starting a courageous conversation about equity, or it could be creating an ERG. It could be creating D&I goals for underrepresented groups and sharing those goals publicly. And that will be part of the topics that you'll hear about throughout the day. But the point is, for all of us as a sector, we need to continue to make and take actions, large and small, to create that momentum for lasting change that will not only propel our industry into a more creative, innovative, and inclusive future, but it's an more equitable future as well. And we know that manufacturing has long had the benefit of bringing people's way of lives, right? It was a tremendous incubator for the middle class coming out of World War II. It is the way that people can support their families with high-paying, exciting careers, and having that be more inclusive could not be a better calling. And so thank you all for being here. Thank you all for joining. And we're excited to officially kick off the second D&I Summit. So AJ, back to you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Before we kick off our first official session today, I just want to share a few stats to give context. The first is from McKinsey. Companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to have better financial returns. Companies in the top quartile for gender diversity are 15% more likely to have better financial returns. In short, data has shown that diversity correlates to a better financial performance. But we also know from our latest D&I report that while 87% of CEOs in our industry are focusing on talent diversity and inclusiveness, only 33% have a D&I leader in their company. In this era of globalization, diversity in business includes ability, age, gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, but also education, political beliefs, and socioeconomic backgrounds. Today, the benefits of creating an inclusive culture for all individuals goes beyond public relations and marketing campaigns. While the moral argument for D&I is impactful enough, it's the financial outcomes that has made D&I a necessity for a business to be competitive. We're going to kick off today's summit with a deeper dive into the latest data on diversity and inclusion in manufacturing from our colleagues and research partners. Dr. Chad Moutre, the director of the Center of Manufacturing Research, Dr. Robert Westcott, the president at Keybridge Research, and Megan Ye, an associate at Keybridge Research.
So I'm Chad Moutre. I run the Center for Manufacturing Research here at the Manufacturing Institute. I'm also the chief economist for the National Association of Manufacturers, which is probably how many of you know me. And it all starts with data, right? So it's kind of fitting that AJ stole some of my lines, I guess, with some data points that are out there. You know, oftentimes when we talk about diversity and inclusiveness, I'll have the team come to me and say, I need a number on how many Hispanics are there in manufacturing. And so we quickly go to the BLS website and pull out a number, right? But that's great, but it doesn't really get into what manufacturers are doing, how they're thinking about diversity and inclusiveness. And so that's why we really started to think about really doing this benchmarking study, which we've never done before at the Manufacturing Institute. And so that's a nice opportunity for us to really kind of dive in to do some data. I will say up front, this is probably my last line, but I'll do it now. This is the beginning of this process. This was the first of the benchmarking studies, but we certainly want to continue to build on it. And so when we were thinking about doing this, I reached out to Keybridge Research. Keybridge has Robert Westcott and Megan here. They've done a great number of studies for us over the years. We did an aging workforce study that came out a couple of years ago. Later today, you'll hear about the multi-generational teams study that Keybridge did for us, also with AARP. And they also been doing a lot of benchmarking stuff for the Business Roundtable. So for me, it was a great opportunity for us to work once again with Keybridge. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob and say, why should we really be looking at? I kind of set it up here a little bit, but why should manufacturers care about diversity and inclusiveness? Why are we even diving into this benchmarking study? What's the value for having this data?
Yeah, Chad. So thanks for having us here. Megan and I are really excited to be here. We are with this economic research and public policy firm here in Washington called Keybridge, as you just mentioned. And we in our own company have a very active DEI committee, and Megan actually is the chair of that committee. So we're passionate about these issues. And as you mentioned, we have been working for quite a few years now with a number of different business associations, some with large companies as members, some with small companies as members. But we're really excited to be doing the first survey of manufacturing firms on their DEI questions and practices. So in terms of why companies should be interested, I think Carolyn set it up pretty well in her opening remarks. Manufacturing sector is critical to the growth of the American economy. We're really learning that now after COVID and seeing some of the bottlenecks and how important it is to make things and get them to customers. About 12.5 million people work in the manufacturing sector. But as Carolyn mentioned, there's a shortage now of about 900,000 jobs in manufacturing, job openings in manufacturing. And some projections say that by 2030, we could have over 2 million openings in the manufacturing sector. So that's the need. We need more workers in manufacturing. The good news is the American population is growing, it's active, and it's increasingly diverse. And so this provides a ground for reaching out and helping to recruit more diverse workers into the workforce. We think can close the gap for the manufacturing sector. So that's exciting. It's not just getting people on the factory floor or in manufacturing firms. So research is increasingly showing that there are many benefits to having a more diverse and inclusive workforce. It is easier to recruit workers. That's great. It's easier to retain workers. It's easier to motivate workers. And as AJ pointed out, it also can be good for the bottom line. So those are some of the reasons that we're looking at. If we could have the next slide. So we sought to reach out and basically do a big temperature check on the manufacturing industry to find out what companies are doing. So this isn't us telling them what you should be doing. This is us asking, what are you doing? What is important? What are your values? What do you think is important? And we reached out and did this survey of over 300 manufacturing firms, and we got their answers. And the goal here was to create a baseline. If you're going to try to improve something over time, you have to measure it. And so we're measuring it for the first time, and we're taking stock of what are the priorities and what are the practices. So Chad, actually, it was your members of 300 firms. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about
Sure.
the characteristics of those 300 firms.
So as he noted, we did do 300 firms that responded to the survey. About 40% of them were small manufacturers with fewer than 500 employees. 24% of them were medium-sized, and 36% were large manufacturers. And so that was a nice representative group, really, for the most part. And actually, I was pretty happy with 300 people responding to it. And I think that really speaks to just how important of an issue this is. What does it tell you, Rob, about diversity and inclusive efforts at these companies?
Yeah. So if we can have the next slide. The thing that came out more than anything in our survey was that manufacturing firms view D&I as a business imperative. It's not a wish list or something that would be nice, but it really is a business imperative. We asked about 30 questions in our survey, and I think the most important one is the one that's on the screen right now. We said, what is it? Why are you thinking about D&I? What's in it for you? And 62% of the manufacturing firms said we want to be an employer of choice. It helps us become an employer of choice. 60% said we want to reflect the community that we operate in, and this helps us do that. Another 50% said it helps strengthen our competitive positioning in the marketplace. So these are some of the reasons. You see some of the other factors that companies reported. About 50%, basically, they just said it's the right thing to do, and we want to do it. It helps us line up with what our employees are expecting. It helps us line up with what our customers are expecting, and that's why we do it. Only 5% of the survey respondents said that they're not yet making D&I issues a high priority with their business. So I think those are the key findings. Business imperative.
Okay, Megan. What does the survey tell us about the companies that are invested in D&I?
Yeah, so when it comes to companies who are more invested in D&I, something really interesting that we found is that companies more invested in D&I recognize that more work needs to be done. They're more likely to say, hey, we actually think we do struggle with D&I issues, where on the flip side, companies that don't view D&I as a business imperative yet don't say that they typically struggle with D&I issues. And something else that we found really interesting was that 2/3 of companies consider D&I to be a focus for their company, but 1/3 report struggling with D&I issues. And another trend that we also found is that larger companies are more likely to both prioritize and admit to struggles with D&I, whereas smaller companies do not. And that might just be due to more limited resources or just smaller networks that they're not able to prioritize D&I initiatives at that time. But this slide illustrates exactly what I was saying at the beginning, that D&I tends to be a key focus for companies that are more likely to also say that they struggle with D&I issues.
So Megan, excuse me, what other findings were identified in the survey, particularly what dimensions of diversity are measured there that you can kind of highlight?
Yeah, so in the survey, we asked companies, do you track any particular dimensions of diversity? And there were several dimensions of diversity that rose to the top. So we asked them, hey, when you look at your board of directors, your leadership team, your employee base, what are the dimensions of diversity that you typically track? And for most companies, race and ethnicity was the highest focus of D&I tracking, followed by age, gender identity, and military veteran status. What's interesting, however, is that even though gender is currently the most or biggest opportunity to diversify talent in the manufacturing sector, this focus on race and ethnicity may just illustrate that D&I initiatives are influenced by national conversation or current events. And in comparison to what is most likely to be tracked, what is most least likely to be tracked are things like sexual orientation, which may just be due to individual privacy concerns, which kind of highlights that not all dimensions of diversity are visible, and nor can they be tracked because people don't want to reveal that about themselves, which is totally fine.
Yep.
And then similarly, we asked companies, when it comes to hiring plans, which dimensions of diversity are you really focusing on? And again, race and ethnicity rose to the top when it came to hiring plans among companies focused on D&I, followed by gender identity, military veteran status, and disability. What is interesting, though, is even for companies that say that D&I is a key focus, well below half reported plans to increase hiring for each of these categories that are measured. So to me, that kind of really illustrates this kind of disconnect between awareness of the issue, but not necessarily action or concrete plans to increase these particular categories of diversity. And then when we also asked our companies, are you planning on increasing representation, and how has representation changed over the last 5 years? Once again, race and ethnicity is also the category for which companies have increased representation the most over the last 5 years. And what's also interesting that we found is that military veteran status and age actually experienced the greatest decreases in representation over the last 5 years.
So that's all. Those are all great stats. So what are companies focusing on when it comes to the D&I initiatives that they actually are doing?
Yeah, so companies are largely focused on attracting diverse candidates, but less so on retention and promotion. As you can see from the graph, less than 50% of companies say that they have plans in place for both retaining employees and training and promoting employees. So they're largely focused on hiring applicants from diverse backgrounds, but less so on making sure that they stay within the company and are promoted equitably. Nearly 60% of companies want to increase hiring from particular diverse groups, and they have programs to attract those candidates, but far fewer have actual programs for retaining, training, and promoting those employees. And this kind of suggests a near-term focus on diversity efforts. And for me, this is where this distinction between diversity and inclusion comes into play. You can have programs to attract diverse candidates, but if you're not changing company culture and workplace to be more inclusive of those employees might just choose to leave, leaving companies exactly where they started with in the first place. So it's, for me, really important that even though companies are trying to boost their diverse talent pools, it's also important to look at the flip side of inclusion and making sure that their workplaces are inclusive of diverse people.
So all this is great, and I think one of the things that we want to do, I kind of already foreshadowed this earlier, is okay, how can we build on it, right? So we'll have a little conversation here about that. I know one of the things that AJ and I have talked about is, number one, continue to do this type of analysis every year, right? So we can just continue to have this baseline and kind of build off of it and see how companies evolve over time in terms of these initiatives. But also, I think we really, I think, want to know, this is something AJ has said to me many times, it's important that you're hiring more women, but where are they in the company? Are they in positions of influence, or what kind of roles do they have? Similarly for other measures of diversity as well, when you're hiring minorities, when you're looking at sexual orientation, where are they in the company? So I think that's one of the things that we want to be able to look at is actually what are the roles that these folks are performing, and hopefully we can continue to make progress in that as well. So that's one of the avenues that I think something we want to look at as we move into 2022. But what are some ideas that you guys might have? Maybe I'll start with you, Rob. What are some ideas that you might have in terms of how we could continue to kind of build on this and flesh it out a little bit further?
Yeah. So again, the first survey that we've just done is baseline. So that's like ground zero. That's where we are starting in 2021. And so I definitely think that regular sampling and surveying of members is a great way to track whether we're seeing progress. I think Megan is exactly right that, and AJ had also identified, there are gaps between what companies aspire to and then what they're actually doing or what they're able to achieve. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges, to start to close that gap. And then the other thing is just resources and tools. And I know that Manufacturing Institute has been working on developing toolboxes for helping companies with many different issues. including hiring more older workers and everything else. But I think companies do need resources to help them have some tools of how they can move the ball forward and get a really great, motivated, excited workforce for the future.
Yeah, that's right. What about you, Megan?
I think Rob answered a lot of exactly what I would have said, but I really would love to learn a bit more about how companies are working to change their culture to be more inclusive, to ensure that diverse candidates who do choose to accept a job at a company ultimately want to stay and are ultimately promoted up within the company. So I think doing a deeper dive on best practices or recommendations on how to best structure inclusivity in a workplace would be really beneficial. As well as just, getting a better understanding of how companies are reaching out to diverse applicants. What are their talent pools looking like? What are their pipelines? And just kind of getting a better understanding of, how they're recruiting and what their strategies are.
Yeah, I would just say we work with a number of different business associations, and one of the key benefits is learning from others. And so I think the more we can have groups like meetings like this where people can share their stories. This really worked for us. This was a great strategy. These are the kinds of things that can move the ball forward. And, they're one of the key reasons to join a business association like NAM.
Yeah, that's right.
You can benefit from learning from what others are doing.
That's definitely true. I hear that all the time. As we were doing all the interviews, even on this topic, or the multi-generational team study that you'll see later today, a lot of people just simply want to know. I want to know what those other companies are doing so I can learn from them and see what their best practices are. I think the other thing that I would say, and I used to be chief economist at the SBA, so I tend to think of small firms a lot, is that there's probably a huge difference between small and medium-sized manufacturers and what initiatives they have, mostly because of resources and time and scope versus what some of the larger, especially the multinational companies are doing in this space. And so I think that's probably the other thing. And those are the folks probably that need the most resources, to be honest with you, just because they might not have a dedicated person to it, even though it's a priority, right? It's probably just their HR person, but still it's something that they prize in terms of what they're wanting to do. So I'm going to throw this question at you. We didn't rehearse this one, so hopefully I'm not shocking you. What is the biggest surprise that you saw in the findings here? Let's start with you, Megan. Maybe with you. Is there a surprise that you?
Let me give that some thought. I do think it is pretty surprising that military veteran status and age were the two categories that experienced the greatest decreases in representation. I could speculate as to why age, just because manufacturing is an aging sector, and so that could just be due to people retiring. But I did find the military veteran status decrease to be really interesting, but we didn't, it was just a survey, so we weren't asking for specifics. So that is potentially an area that we could also try to dive into in the future. Yeah.
What about you, Rob?
So I was actually interested in the military question. Also, we've recently at Keybridge hired one of our first veterans, and Megan and I were joking, but we, on Veterans Day, a week ago or 2 weeks ago, we actually had a little tribute to our employee. We gave a little description of his military service and sent it around to the company as a little tribute of his contribution to the country. And so I was surprised to see that going down. I would think that the people with the military background would be a good match for many manufacturing firms. I guess the tracking of the number of employees and then the number of business leaders and the number of board of directors, that's not a surprise. We've done other work, and of course we see that same pattern. But it's pretty dramatic in the data that we had with the manufacturing survey, and it does show there is a challenge to not just get people in the door, but to train them up and get them promoted and let them take on increasing jobs. You're not going to necessarily make everyone the CEO the second day on the job, but moving people up the ranks, they become division leaders or work team leaders. And I think that's the challenge for manufacturers, is to get people and get them up the curve so that they are playing increasing leadership roles in the companies. And that then poises them for more substantial, additional promotions and responsibility down the line.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we certainly this was a huge part of the multi-generational teams conversations that we were having, is these teams, and it's the same is true with diversity in general, hopefully improve overall productivity. You get better results, you get better morale, right? There's a whole host of things that hopefully can spin out of this that we didn't measure necessarily, although you heard a lot of it anecdotally in some of the conversations that we were having. But I think that that's something that is important. So this is where I become interactive with the folks that are in the room here. And I'll ask you, what data did you see that maybe surprised you, maybe, and or what kind of data would you like to see, right? As we're thinking about continue to expand this benchmarking moving into the future, into 2022 and beyond. What are things that you didn't see on here that you would like to see that perhaps we could try to dig into? So this is where you guys get to be interactive. And we will repeat the question because for the filming here, you're not mic'd up. So I'll start over here.
I would be curious, the data that I would like to see, I'd be curious, you had mentioned that, we know that there are a lot of companies that are very invested in DEI and recognize its importance, but there's also, that's not mirrored in, DEI representation. It's not mirrored necessarily in the leadership. And we know that they're facing, they acknowledge that they have some struggles. I'd be curious to know what some of the common struggles are, beyond resource limitations. Like, are there other barriers that might be getting in the way?
Yeah.
Do you want to repeat the question, Chad?
So the question was, there's an interest in knowing what barriers are standing in the way from people moving into key roles, right? In terms of being able to, to my comments earlier about where are these people, right? Or where are they in positions of influence, right? It's great that they're on the shop floor as well, but where are they also in positions of influence or the C-suite or other places? And what's standing in the way of that? Is that correct?
Yeah, and just generally what's standing in the way in terms of being able to move forward in this space.
Yeah.
I'll just jump in with one observation. First of all, smaller firms, many of the survey respondents were smaller firms. Many of them were in rural areas. And so some of them just are geographically limited. I mean, if you're in the middle of Idaho, for example, you and you're a small firm, you are probably going to be somewhat more limited in your ability to reach out to you may not be hiring with a national audience, for example. You may not be advertising, trying to recruit people nationally. So that's one limitation that we saw in the data is probably small firms have additional challenges. I don't know, Megan, do you have any other observations or the challenges of getting...
I probably have spoken a bit too much about this, but I think the inclusivity portion is really important. And so I think one barrier that many companies face, large or small, is just how to make our workplace more inclusive. How do we ensure that people are comfortable bringing their whole self, to work? And I think addressing those barriers, whatever they may be, would create, really large strides for increasing diversity in the workplace.
That's a great point. And great. We'll continue to look at that. Any other comments or, yeah?
I would see in future kind of surveys, information or data around the retention programs and like the training programs of what, not necessarily what they're doing, but the types or
Yeah.
just to dive in a little deeper into because I can see where that is a struggle. I think there's a lot of effort right now into that recruiting process, but what's happening, internally to continue to grow and diversify. Make sure that people are staying in the company that we have attractive.
So the question was a desire to see more stuff, more research and data on, and just best practices on retention, right? And actually, I agree with you. And one of my goals has been to try to do a lot more in this space, because when we talk about one of the top challenges of manufacturers right now, it's attracting and retaining a quality workforce, right? That's the question on my NAM Manufacturers Outlook survey, right? And we focus a lot on the attraction, which is great, but we also need to focus on retention. We know how expensive it is when you lose a worker to replace that worker. We know from data, and we're all economists up here, quits are at a record high, right? So everyone, so we're certainly seeing a lot of churn in the labor market right now. It's very expensive to replace them. What can you do to encourage those workers to stay? We did put out a study earlier this year, and I can make sure you get it. We did it with the American Psychological Association on retention. And I have some other ideas of other retention studies down that I'm going to continue to flesh out coming forward. I do think we can continue to focus a lot more on how can you keep those workers that you have, What are some morale things that you can do, some culture things that you can do? Not just on research, but I think also in terms of overall workshops and webinars and just sharing of ideas can be helpful. I think to a certain extent, the aging workforce is a conversation about retaining workers too, because my own survey says 37% of manufacturers don't want their older workers to retire, right? That's a large reason why we spent the last 6 months working on that study, right, for AARP. So that's also a retention issue, largely because there's not necessarily a next generation of worker to replace them. And also, as you are older, you have a lot of experience and you don't want to lose that knowledge base, right? And so those are all issues that I think we're going to continue to dive in moving forward. Now, that's just a general retention conversation, but I think we also can put a layer of diversity and inclusiveness in that as well, of making sure that once you do get that woman in a position of power, that minority in a position of power, that you can keep them. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, because I'm sure you're doing a lot in
I
this
just
space
wanted
too.
to make one point, which is when we had our first draft of the survey questions that we wanted to ask AJ, as you know, we had quite a few questions. We could have gone on. And we decided this would be a benchmarking survey. This would be the chance to collect the first views of, is this important? Why are you doing it? And so on. But I would see extensions of those kinds of questions as we go into the second year and third year and get more into, rather than just like, is this important? Do you agree? I think the survey should be diving more into the kinds of issues you're talking about, of what's working, what isn't, what are the practices, start telling me stories of things that work. And so I would see that as a natural evolution of the survey that we're doing.
That's a great point, though. Both of these ideas are ones we have, so far we're on the market, which is great. What other comments? Yeah.
You talked about next generation of worker, and maybe you talked about the ages of multiple generations. I'd like to see if you've broken it down to the categories from an age standpoint. What is that 20-something? What are the manufacturers, what are companies doing to, you want to retain, but you needed to get them in the door.
Yes.
And I came from my previous company where we were a print company, and that was kind of a dying breed, but we were more digital, but still the issue of getting that workforce in, they weren't interested in coming.
Yeah. So we are working on another study right now with Deloitte. If you remember, in 2017, we released the perception study with Deloitte, and we're updating that. So look for that to come out in February. I've been on every one of these calls, much like I was on every one of the calls with Megan for this one. And I can tell you that companies tell me that all the time, that the hardest workers to hire, yes, they're having trouble with some other categories as well, but it's those entry-level workers, right? Especially with the labor market heating up where it is now, is just a lot of competition for talent locally, right? And it's those entry level that are really the hardest to get, right? And so that's a large part of why we have so many programs towards attracting workers at the Manufacturing Institute. But I think what we've seen really over the last 6 months to a year is that has become even harder, right? With more quits, with everyone raising wages, right? Especially in other sectors, that has become harder in the manufacturing sector. And so I've heard from a lot of companies, and this is getting off the diversity topic, sorry, but that it's hard, that they've had to raise wages pretty substantially to stay competitive, right? And so that aspect of it, right? And certainly we can layer diversity into that conversation as well. But how do you get people in the door, right? And how do you go to a larger audience, right? You've seen some manufacturers who have gone out and tried to attract to historical Black universities, right? To try to increase that pipeline. And I think that was one of the recommendations actually in the aging workforce study that I'm talking about. But you see that quite a bit, I think, and that's one of the bigger challenges. I don't know if you want to add to that.
I just have a couple of thoughts on that. We just yesterday, the Business Roundtable rolled out a survey that we did, our fourth quarter CEO Economic Outlook survey. And we had a series of questions on what are you doing to get workers and retain workers and so on. And number one, is be no surprise to everyone in this room, was, yeah, we're paying more compensation. But one of the top answers kind of surprised me a little bit, which is we're promoting our company culture. That is a big part of our recruitment activity. And I think D&I can fit squarely into that box of yes, the culture. And, even at Keybridge, we are hiring, and, we're in the market, just like all of you guys are in the market, trying to hire good, excellent people. And young workers, new high school or new college graduates, they want to work for a company where they feel good about the job they do. They feel it's socially useful. They feel that the company is on, is a force for good in the world. And D&I can fit squarely in that bucket. And I think it can help to recruit workers. So yeah, it's not just paying people more. People want to work for a company they feel is a force for good in the world.
Yeah, and I would also say that your question really does set up this multi-generational team study that does kind of dive into traditional pipelines that manufacturing firms have typically drawn from to attract younger workers. And in that study, we also suggest, looking into potentially some non-traditional pipelines, such as community-based organizations, in order to, diversify the talent pool. And I'm just going to speak from personal experience. Actually, before I went to graduate school, I actually worked at a St. Louis public high school. And I worked at a career and technical education high school. And so students were put into internships and pathways. A lot of our students were, interning at Boeing their senior year of high school. And so I think another thing that's also really important to kind of increase the pipeline is also to, increase outreach to high schools, especially to high schools that are more technically focused, to try and get people, into the pipeline, more interested in manufacturing, before they go to a 2-year or 4-year school.
Great. Good question. Any other questions? Oh, AJ.
The promotion strategy. It's something I hear all the time is how do you get more diverse candidates to the next level, to manager, director, and to leadership. And then tying that into board leadership, I think has been a pretty common struggle.
Yeah. You want to comment on any of that?
So,
oh, we should repeat the question. Sorry, Rob.
How do you get people, how do you fill the promotion pipeline and get people up get them promotable, and then how do you promote them? That's AJ's question. One of the challenges, the economy's been through the ringer the last 2 years. I think we all would acknowledge that. And one of the, I think, challenges many manufacturing firms have had is, if business is not good, like, and let's say the first 6 or 9 months of COVID when factories are shut down and that's a really big challenge. If business is stagnant, it's just hard to have it's hard to be promoting anyone, let alone, certain people that you want to promote. So first of all, the backdrop of the economy matters a lot. Now, the manufacturing sector is thriving right now, and sales are up and revenues are up and industrial activity is up, and we have some supply chain problems here and there. But, I think the door is opening to a period of growth and increased orders, increased order books, increased sales, and all that. That at least opens the door to opportunities. And so first of all, that's important. I'm an economist, and you have to have the rising tide does lift boats. So I think we've got that working now. And I don't know, Megan, any other ideas of what we can do to encourage promotion?
Yeah, I think AJ's question, I think you really are setting up exactly what these next steps need to be, which is, what are companies doing to ensure equity in the promotion process? Immediately what comes to mind for me is, things like ensuring that people who are on the promotion or, annual review committee, that they're trained in, D&I issues to make sure that, they're aware of potential biases that may have conscious or unconscious, to make sure that, the promotion process is indeed equitable and is not really being colored by any sort of biases or stereotypes. So that's the first thing that really comes to mind for me with trying to make sure that the promotion process is really equitable for everybody.
Well, the other idea that I have, and you already know this, AJ, is that pick an occupation, right? Plant manager, engineer, whatever it is, whatever that might be. What makes a great plant manager? What makes a great engineer, right? And going out and actually trying to, here we're mapping overall for manufacturing, but what are the aspects of success there that we could benchmark, that people could learn from, right? And so that's another avenue to that. And I think that once you kind of set that up, then it kind of, maybe you want to be a plant manager, that's something that you could look to say, well, I have those traits, right? And maybe that helps to set that conversation up a little bit differently. So that's one of my, I'm giving all of my ideas away today, but that's one of my other ideas that we could potentially do.
Yeah, actually, something else I would also
Yeah.
say is just standardizing the promotion process for each particular job description or position title, making sure that there's a standard set of questions that's being asked to all people up for promotion to ensure that, no one is being asked a different set of questions that they might not answer as well. So I think that's also another helpful strategy.
Okay. What other questions do you have? So, go ahead.
It's an observation that I think when we think about what makes a great plant manager, we used to think about somebody who's been at multiple sites, and at least what I've seen is that people are less willing to relocate these days. I mean, they can find another job. So as we're thinking about how to grow people within a company, that's one of the challenges that I see out there. And we may have to rethink what makes a great plant manager to think about how do we help those folks that are interested in growing, but don't want to move to be successful.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the comment was that not everyone wants to move, right? And because people want to stick where they are, that might change the way we want to think about what makes a successful plant manager or whatever other career they might be, because that's typically how they've always been kind of recruited in the past. Mobility is a big issue, right? And I often say that even in the context of job openings, because people would often ask me, I'm sure they ask you, Rob, as well as an economist, why do we have 900,000 jobs? We have all these people who are looking for work, and yet we have all these job openings, and mobility is a big factor there because people want to stay where they are. There's other factors like perceptions as well, but I think that's part of it.
I would just say one thing on that mobility question. Obviously, work from home or remote work works better, say, in the service sector than it might in the manufacturing sector. But I think 2022 is going to be a big year of reassessment. I think a lot of people who have chosen to work remotely, there's got to be a period of time when things are normalizing. I hope this Omicron thing is not really bad. Let's all hope it's not bad. But I think people are generally going to be coming back into the labor force in person as we get into 2022, and I think there's going to be some shifting around. And so I do think that more people are going to come back to work in person in 2022, and so some of the, like I'm going to go to Idaho and just camp out there, I think some of that's probably going to be a little less of a factor in 2022. Yeah.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I have one that might be our last, but we do a lot of thinking about what does the future of work look like. Yeah. A lot of the studies that we do are about the future of work, and what is manufacturing going to look like in 2030, right? There's a conference next week on that from the Manufacturing Leadership Council. What does manufacturing look like, and then how does the job change as a result of that? The other aspect of that, and one that certainly that relates to this topic, is demographics. What does the United States or the world look like in 2030, right? And it's going to look different than it does today, right? And so that's the other aspect as you're thinking about recruiting and bringing in talent, entry level or even more skilled jobs. Demographics are going to matter, right? And I think that's why this is an important conversation. Data about demographics, I think, is as important as anything else. And you can maybe add to that bit, but that's...
demographics globally are really shifting rapidly. So China is losing about 3 million workers a year out of the labor force because, this goes back to the one-child policy. And, more people are turning 65 or retiring, and not too many people are turning 18 and 19 in China. And so that is putting upward pressure on wages in China, and that's going to make China less and less attractive over the next 10 years as the world's factory to make things. So that's just number one. Second, Europe has the same problems. And believe it or not, the US is actually pretty good among industrial countries. We're one of the best in terms of our demographics. So we're not going to have like the 1.5% increase of workforce that we're having when the baby boom was coming online. And we're not going to be 1.1 like we've been even as recently as 10 years ago, but we're going to be like 0.6, 0.7% increase of labor force going forward. A big question is going to be, what does the U.S. do in terms of immigration policy? That's the one thing that could be a big determinant there. But you take Canada, Australia, the US, I mean, we're like the 3 best countries in the world for demographics. So we have challenges, but we're not as bad as, say, Germany or Italy or France or many other countries. Or Japan is losing most of 1 million people a year in terms of population. 125, 124, 123, that's the population of Japan, million people in the population. So we're not great, but we're better than the rest. And of course, where are you going to make things? Well, the U.S. is going to increasingly look attractive as a place to make things, I think.
And the diversity mix obviously is important there.
And you got to go after everyone. We have to get everyone in the tent that can, that we can hire and line up with a job. That's really what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm. Any last questions, comments? Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad, Robert, and Megan. It is great to hear such information, and it's great to see such engagement in the chat. Aaron, Karen, we will be sure to take your comments into the future research. I also want to take a moment to echo what Megan said. We strongly believe in equity, and we are just starting our data journey specifically for the manufacturing industry. So we're working to build the trust and credibility, but we will begin to explore data specifically around equity in the next iterations of our benchmarking surveys. I also wanted to comment and share that we are very familiar with the growing chasm of production and non-production workers and the unique challenges and opportunities that we're facing to engage. We will share more details later in the summit, but we are planning to use new communities of practice and learning to dive deeper specifically into engaging production workers and frontline talent. Now we're going to shift a little bit to dive into some specific diverse populations, starting with our military. With approximately 200,000 men and women leaving the military each year, Amy and Andrew will share their insights into how companies can connect directly to this population of transitioning service members, veterans, National Guard, reservists, and active duty military spouses. So please join me in welcoming Amy Thomas, Senior Director of Program Development at the Institute, and Andrew Shelgren, the Manager of Supplier Development at Union Pacific.
Like AJ said, I'm Amy Thomas, Senior Director of Programs and Development at the Manufacturing Institute, and I work on our Heroes Make America initiative, which helps manufacturers attract, hire, and retain talent from the military community. And yes, AJ, you're correct, wherever she went. Each year, around 200,000 men and women transition out of the military. These service members and women are uniquely positioned to step into careers in manufacturing, often having technical training, leadership skills, and mission focus. They are also accustomed to working in teams towards a common goal and know how to operate and excel in fast-paced, challenging environments, essential traits for manufacturing. Our Heroes Make America program uses a training model developed with input from diverse manufacturers of all sizes, and we're also an approved Department of Defense SkillBridge program, allowing us access to train service members 6 months before they leave the military. Let's see if I can get this thing to work here. There we go. Our signature training program provides a roadmap for transitioning service members, National Guard, reservist, veterans, and active duty military spouses to earn industry-recognized certifications and credentials, career readiness instruction, transition support, and direct access to manufacturers that are hiring. We offer on-site and virtual training programs in production, logistics, and mechatronics, and we have recently incorporated the use of virtual reality headsets to supplement what they're learning in their training modules. We provide employers direct access to participants via our virtual events, such as Heroes Connect, Manufacturing 101 panels, and Women Heroes, a new partnership with our STEP Women's Initiative here at the Institute. Where available, we also offer on-site direct connections to our participants through manufacturing plant tours, recruiting, and networking events. Additionally, we offer employers resources through our partnerships with the SHRM Foundation and PsychArmor. We feature best practices, case studies, and a Heroes Make America playbook, all located on our website for manufacturers to welcome this talent to their workforce. I want to talk a little bit about our participant demographics. So as you can see from the slide here, 51% of our participants come from minority population. And of that, 16% are female. We're working to increase that number for the females. We represent over 136 different military occupation codes, and we have placed 25% of our graduates into supervisory roles. So this is a great slide here that'll give you a great breakdown of who's coming through our training programs. Finally, would like to highlight a few of our program successes to date. Currently, we've graduated over 600 service members through our training programs. We have a 90% placement rate, so we're really proud of that. We have placed graduates in 42 states and 1 U.S. territory with over 250 companies. And you can see there, we've got on-site training locations in Kansas, Texas, Kentucky, and North Carolina right now. And in January, we will launch Georgia for on-site. So just because they are transitioning out of those certain bases, it doesn't mean that they want to stay there. As you see, we've placed in over 42 states. So to drill down a little further on this, I want to introduce you to Andrew Sjogren. So I'll ask Andrew to come up here. Manager in Supplier Development and Vice President of Union Pacific Bets with Union Pacific. Andrew is a supply chain and logistics expert. Andrew also serves on active duty for the 155th Air Refueling Wing for the Nebraska Air National Guard. He is highly decorated and has been recognized as the 2021 Outstanding Airman of the Year. His military experience was critical for Union Pacific because he serves as the main point of contact for the Department of Defense and Union Pacific's military shipments. While at UP, Andrew served in various leadership roles with the Veterans Employee Resource Group. He is currently the vice president and will soon be the president. He will be responsible for the 700 plus members, veterans and patriots across Union Pacific's 23 state footprint. Thank you for being here with us today, Andrew.
Thanks, Amy.
So I'm going to
Morning, everyone.
All right. So first, can you tell us about why manufacturers should invest and hire from the military community to include veterans and military spouses?
Absolutely. So when you look at it from a veteran standpoint, to kind of reiterate a few of the things you said, you have someone who is coming in and is team-centric and team-focused. The other thing with military individuals is, I can speak about it myself, there's not too many things that we find to be challenging, whereas it could be a very difficult task or a very difficult chore, and we'll figure out how to do it. And I think when you have people who are driven like that in your workforce, it helps kind of breed that mentality with others that they'll be working with. Military individuals too, you're getting someone who, 20, 30 years in multiple positions, that's a seasoned employee. It's tough to go out and find that in the streets, but if you're able to offer them, a good space and a positive environment to work in, it's an easy transition for them. On the spouse side, in first working with Amy and her group, I didn't even put much emphasis into this, but when you eliminate or take away the military spouses from potential candidates and potential opportunities, you're essentially telling 50% of your candidates, we're not as interested. You have veterans and you have their spouses or their partners or, someone that's moved around with them multiple times. They may have skill sets and I think that all of us across the board need to do a better job of tapping into that resource because it's there, it's available. When we held our women's event a few weeks ago, there were military members that were on there, but the number of spouses who were interested in what's going on in transportation and manufacturing actually kind of helped me flip my thinking and understand that we need to be going after both groups aggressively with the same kind of effort.
Yeah, and as a military spouse myself, moving around with my husband, it is harder for military spouses because they hear, "Oh, your spouse is in the military, next." Because how long are you going to be here? We need somebody long term, not somebody, for a year or two. And so that definitely focusing on the military spouse as well as the veteran community should be done. And I think companies are getting better at that.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how your military experience helped you secure your job at Union Pacific?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the Air National Guard, I've been blessed and fortunate enough to be a part of 2 AFSCs, or our specialty codes. You may recognize them on the Army as MOSs. It's our jobs. So my first one was a bioenvironmental engineer. To kind of break that down into layman's terms, think industrial hygiene, OSHA, workplace safety and compliance. When I finished my MBA, the opportunity to work in our finance office came up. But to kind of bring that all full circle, when I applied for a position at UP, they saw someone who had safety experience, which is our #1 goal at UP. Somebody who had finance experience, whether it be tax dollar allocations or payroll, or, that finance bucket is very, very vast. And someone who had been a part of a team, who had volunteered for deployments to go overseas and help other groups out, and had the willingness to learn. I mean, I say environmental engineering and I say finance, but the number of jobs that I've had in my military career isn't just stuck at those 2 levels. Go help stack pallets, go help, pull equipment off the shelves to get go bags ready. And when UP saw that, they understood that they were getting someone who was willing to do what they could for the betterment of those around them. And in the 4 years that I've been at UP, I'm happy to say that I've never said no to any of the opportunities that they put in front of me, and it's benefited me up to this point.
Great. And that's something that we work with our service members and participants, military spouses even, in the HEROES program, is really helping them translate what they did in the service. Because if they've done it 4 years to 20 years, that's most of the time all that they have known, right? So a lot of them went from high school right into the service, never had to write a resume, never had to go through the interview process, so that's all very scary to them, doing that. For example, some of the bases have these mega fairs, mega job fairs, and all the employers can come. And you can have a 25-year plus seasoned colonel, and they're shaking in their boots when they're standing to walk in that room. They've gone to war, but all of these employers out there, they're like uncommon territory for them, and so, they all walk up and have 20 resumes in their hand clenched tightly, and so we work with them on that. And the career transition is, yes, you were in the infantry. Yes, you may have walked a lot and carried a bag full of bullets, but you also did logistics, communication, safety. All of that came into fruition, and you were getting shot at the same time, and you got all of that done. And so it's really helping them change their narrative and understand that civilians won't understand what you did as an infantryman. Some might if they were in the service, but if you need to take that on your resume so they understand what you did and relate it to those terms. So we work on that. We work with mentors like Andrew to say, if you're having problems, let me mentor you with a veteran that made it to the other side. They successfully transitioned and are working in manufacturing. So that's a big part of our HEROES program, is helping them translate those military skills so that HR can understand it. And then on the other side, we help the employers by providing these trainings to help them understand how to read it, right? How to read the resume if one comes across that does have 50 million acronyms on it. Like, what is that?
Yep.
So one of the great things that we do.
And if I may, after our event that we had that focused solely on bringing more females into the manufacturing and transportation sector, I had someone reach out to me directly. This former soldier, to say the least, would be able to step into any company and be an immediate supervisor or leader in their HR department based on what she has done in the military. 25 plus years in EEO, HR, manning, whatever you can think of. But she kept getting rejected. And I looked at her resume, and I am a anti-proponent for all the military acronyms. They drive me insane. Just tell me what you need me to do. I don't need it broken down in 4 and 5 letter acronyms. But we realized that she's sending resumes out to these companies and they're not understanding the significance. So when we kind of pulled it all together, I was able to explain to her, like, what you're doing right now is what a director at my company would do HR wise, which is that's a good level position. And so I explained to her, like, stop selling yourself short, go out in the world with this new resume. Like, you have the ability to be an external candidate and step in and lead a team. You've already done it. You've done it for 25 years. So we'll kind of go into a little bit more with some of the other questions, but the best resource that you have is veterans working at your companies right now. Don't try to dissect maybe context or information on a resume from a veteran or from their spouse that you may not understand. Use your resources internally, because your military veterans will be the first ones to tell you, hey, this is a rock star candidate. You should go after them. And it didn't cost you anything, right? So best thing that you can do. But yeah.
Great. A lot of our manufacturers are interested or want to know more about how do I hire from the National Guard or the Air National Guard when they're active duty? What do I need to know when drill weekend comes up, or if they get deployed and they have to be gone for 6 months? So can you talk to a little bit, since you are currently active duty and working in full time, can you talk to that a little bit about what manufacturers should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to split it into two, because there's a little bit of a, I guess, preconceived notion about the whole drill weekend things. There are 2 days out of the year where I have to miss work. It's 2 Fridays. So that's my case, right? That may be different depending upon your service of branch. I know the Army sometimes drills a little bit more, but don't be afraid of drill weekends. Saturdays and Sundays for the most part, even if they drill 3 days a month, you're only really losing them 1 day of the week. So it's never been an issue for our company. In any of the previous other companies that I worked for. The best thing I can tell you is if you're transparent with your workers, they'll be transparent with you. My boss has my calendar a year in advance. So we know how to plan. All right. And in those days, I'll pretty much try to have everything kind of covered up to that point. But in regards to the deployment, 6 months to 18 months can sometimes be tricky. I have not solved that problem yet. What I can tell you is, don't wait until the 11th hour to make sure individuals on that deployed members team are learning the job and the tasks. Give them opportunity to kind of rotate around and see what they do. I think if anything over the last 2 years has taught us balancing workloads is possible. We just have to put that expectation out there that, hey, this is going to happen, but it's not going to be forever. But I know also too on the Guard side, my deployment that I went on and any of my future deployments that I will go on have all been from a volunteer base as well. So if you constantly have 1 or 2 individuals raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm going on 6-month deployment, and you're like, well, you've been gone for, you've been working here for 2 years, but you've been gone for 18 months. There might be some questions that need to be asked internally, like, why do you feel like you constantly have to leave? And we'll kind of get into that with more of the other questions that are to follow. But that's how I would recommend handling those two. Drill weekends have never been an issue for any employers that I know or any employers that I've been a part of. But from a deployment standpoint, just engage your team. Have conversations. If there's concerns with some of those team members that are going to step up, the time to address them is when you find out about the deployment and not 1 day before that member is going to be overseas or out of contact for 6 months up to 1.5 years.
Great. Well, incredibly, in the last few years, 1 in 4 hires at Union Pacific have been from the military community. Your workforce is up to 25% military affiliated at Union Pacific. And you work closely with your HR team to make that happen. So how does partnering with organizations like the Manufacturing Institute or the Heroes Make America program help you in those efforts?
Yeah. Imagine being able to reap the benefits and having someone else do the work, right? I have gotten to know Amy and her team, closely over the last month, and the amount of work that they are putting in to help individuals who are in my maybe same circumstance, who are transitioning out and looking for opportunities in the private sector or the civilian sector. It's kind of twofold, right? I go back to my previous comments. When we on the civilian side try to dissect and figure out what a service member's career actually looks like, it can sometimes be challenging. And to her point, you have these very seasoned veterans who are coming out of the service, and they walk into an interview room, and these are people who have been deployed overseas, have been in harrowing situations, and they're afraid to talk to 3 HR talent acquisition people. So you have this, I hate using this term, but I'm going to use it. You have this middle enterprise that's willing to say, you know what, we're not only going to prepare the candidate and make sure that they are ready to walk in and do an interview, we're going to train them. We're going to certify them. We're going to put them in position with companies that are partnering with us so that those companies can reap the benefits. And you guys on the other side, being the manufacturing and transportation companies, get a well-seasoned, polished employee who maybe without the help of this group, you wouldn't even know they existed. I mean, think about how great and beneficial that is. And I know that UP has started to bolster and build our relationship with your group. And I'm excited to see where the future goes. We have a big initiative that we're trying to institute, which is an 11% improvement for females in our, what I would like to call labor-intensive jobs. And for a while, we're beating our heads against the wall, like, how are we going to accomplish this?
Yeah, and that's exactly why we built Heroes Make America, was to make those connections between the military community and the manufacturing and transportation industries. So just to help them bridge that gap. So when they're getting out of the service, they're coming out with a job, or if they're already out of the service and still need help finding a job, veterans are welcome into our training program as well. So let's talk about your Veterans Employee Resource Group, 700 members strong across 23 states. So that's pretty exciting. What are some tips and tricks or best practices if industry doesn't have a Veterans Employee Resource Group? How should they start one? If they have one, how do they bring it back to life? If it's kind of, dwindling down, how do they keep it interactive and engaged in this incredibly empowering group like Union Pacific has done?
Yeah, and I'm going to spend the bulk of my time talking about this because I love my ERG personally, but I also love the other ERGs that Union Pacific has to represent a multitude of demographics. The one thing that I would encourage you, so if you do not have an employee veterans ERG, the thing that I tell our field chapters in various locations when they want to get started is, you don't have to do something every single day to make the world a better place. Find your niche event, find your niche group. Our Houston field chapter, guy by the name of Joe McCluskey, I'm going to go see him in Houston next week. They have found a way to partner with Toys for Tots and the Marine Corps Battalion in Houston, Texas. And I think over the last 2 years have delivered 60,000 pounds in toys. This year, they're going to try to match that number over the last 2 years. And you think about the struggles of last year, and they were still able to accomplish 45,000 pounds of toys. That's their event for the year. They put all their eggs in that basket. They're successful at it. And it's really kind of brought an understanding to the community of how important this group is to the community. Could you imagine if they tried to do something like that once a week or once a month? People get burned out, right? And that's one of the tough things, to your second point of how, if we have one, how do we re-engage it? Explain to these individuals that you don't need to have 12 marquee events a year. If you have 1 or 2, your employees will be excited, they'll be engaged, and they'll want to jump in and help out as much as they can. Establish roles and responsibilities. The other thing that makes these ERGs kind of difficult is you sometimes have people, and I'm guilty of this as well, who want to jump in and do everything. And sometimes that can kind of rub people the wrong way, or people feel like their voice isn't being heard. My role and responsibility as vice president is to make sure that individuals who step up and want to volunteer for this have every equal right and opportunity to be heard, to be seen, to contribute to the group in a positive way. And so, that right there makes sure that everybody is doing their part to positively impact our community. Setting up 501c3 status. I mean, we are a 501c3 status charity, so that helps us from a legitimacy standpoint when we're trying to go out into the community to positively impact other people. And lastly, I would tell you this, all right? And we can have a further discussion about this maybe off camera, but don't make people feel like they have to be not part of it, all right? I always joke, I'm part of LEAD, which is a female empowerment group at UP. As you can see from me sitting up here, I do not necessarily belong to that demographic. a big problem that we have sometimes at UP that we're slowly getting over is, well, I can't be a part of vets because I'm not a veteran. That's not necessarily true at all. You said you were a military spouse. You could be a member of veteran. You may have a brother or sister that is, currently overseas. Why couldn't you be a part of UP Vets? It impacts your family. All right. Implore your employees, implore those individuals in your company that when you have employee resource groups, demographic means nothing. It would be the most counterproductive thing for diversity and inclusion to say, just because this is a veterans group, we're only allowing veterans in. Or just because LEAD is a female empowerment group, only females are a part. Progress is not made that way. You have to open the doors and tell anyone, please come in, we're happy to have you.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. This has been a great conversation today, and hopefully everybody got some good takeaways from it. I would be remiss if I didn't say how you can connect with us, right? So we also have a LinkedIn showcase page that is most up to date on events that we're doing, graduation, when classes are starting, and those types of events. So thank you so much, and I think we're good.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Amy and Andrew. Our next speaker is Maurice Jones. He was appointed CEO of 110 in March of 2021. 110 is a coalition of leading chief executives and their companies who are coming together to upskill, hire, and promote 1 million Black Americans over the next 10 years. They should not yet have a 4-year degree and into family-sustaining jobs with opportunities for advancement. Prior to joining 110, Maurice was president of the Local Initiatives Support Corporation, one of the country's largest organizations supporting projects to revitalize communities and catalyze economic opportunity for residents. Please join me in welcoming Maurice.
I hope to share some information with you about what companies are doing to really catapult the equity journey with a particular focus on Black talent without 4-year degrees. So let me jump right in, and hopefully we'll have some time to have a little back and forth at the end. So a little bit of history. Right, we 2020 occurred, and in 2020 we had a pandemic, right? And that pandemic had and still has a disproportionately adverse impact on Black communities and other communities of color. We had a recession that the country is rebounding from, but a recession that also had a disproportionately adverse impact on Black talent in communities of color. And we had the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and most especially the murder of Mr. George Floyd right in front of our faces, literally. And this motivated a group of CEOs, namely Ken Frazier, who at the time was CEO of Merck, and Ken Chenault, who had been the CEO of American Express, to ask the question, what can business do to help the country become a more perfect union? And what they decided was what business does better than anything else was produce jobs. And that was the place to focus. They enlisted some teammates, Jenny Rometty, who at the time was the CEO of IBM, and Charles Phillips, who had done a number of things, who is at Infor, and then Kevin Shera, who had been the CEO of Amgen. And they started focusing on the opportunity to use jobs as a way to help us create a more perfect union, a way to get at a gap that I want to talk about, and a way to help the country and the business community continue to pursue a journey that included more equity and inclusion. So this is what they started looking at. These data show a number of things. One, they show a racial wealth gap in the country that we have at this moment as we speak that is at least 10-1 if you compared the wealth of white families versus the wealth of Black families. And by the way, if you disaggregate that and start looking at different markets around the country, that number is greater than 10-1. The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston did a study a few years back, and they determined that the net worth of a white family in the Boston area was somewhere around $247,000. And the net worth of a Black family in the Boston area was somewhere around $8. No zeros, $8. 247,008. Boston. You can replicate disparities like that in most of our major metropolitan areas, although Boston is up there in terms of disparity. And so you can't get at a wealth gap in the country unless you get at several things, including quality jobs, right? Who has the jobs that pay enough wages that allow you to save money, pay for housing, pay for transportation, invest in your and your children's education, right? And so when they started breaking down the jobs piece, they looked and discovered that if you look at jobs that pay, and this is today, by the way, this is not history, this is today. In fact, it is worse today because COVID has impacted these numbers. Jobs that pay $60,000 and above, on paper, 79% of them require a 4-year degree. Jobs that pay $40,000 and above, on paper, 71% of them require a 4-year degree. That's your right hand column. And then if you look right next to it, what you discover is if you look at Black talent in the workforce today, ages 25 and above, 76% of us do not yet have a 4-year degree. And oh, by the way, that number is 66% for white talent. We have a systemic barrier in the private sector to one earning their way into the middle class in this country that is contributing to an incredible wealth and opportunity, and let's face it, power gap in the country. These CEOs looked at this and said, let's take on this systemic barrier. That's where the vision for 110 came from. They decided that they were going to rally their colleagues and head for the North Star of hiring and promoting 1 million Black talent who do not yet have 4-year degrees into family-sustaining careers and jobs over 10 years. 110. That's how this came about. We have been recruiting companies to come on board to this journey. We're up to about 60 companies now. And the companies basically make a handful of commitments. One, to put jobs that don't require four-year degrees on the table for Black talent who don't have four-year degrees to compete for. Two, and this one is one reason why we call this 110 and not 1-1, because this is going to be a journey, not something we can do in 1 year. We're asking companies to make their talent management, their talent hiring practices more equitable, more inclusive. Remove the four-year degree requirement where it's not the only way that you can come about the skills needed to do the job. Focus on the skills that you need that employee to have on day one, and the skills that you need that employee to have in year 2, in year 3, in year 4, and so on. And what are the pathways with an S on the end that one can come about those skills? Remove the four-year degree requirement. Focus on a skills-based approach to hiring and promoting. That's the core of the 110 journey. That's the essence of the barrier we're trying to break through. We're saying it doesn't make sense for 79% of the jobs that require a four-year degree, or 79% of the jobs that pay a family-sustaining wage, to require a four-year degree as a gateway. So that improving hiring and retention and advancement and other practices are a huge piece of the 110 commitment. The third piece, and it's connected, is to engage all in a community of practice. So the 60 companies that are in the 110 coalition, the CEOs meet 3 or 4 times a year. Right now, we're curating it virtually. I didn't know what Zoom was, by the way, before, but that's another discussion for us to have. But we bring them together virtually, 2 hours, once a quarter, and we wrestle with and learn from one another and find ways to work together on the things that we've got to be great on to achieve the North Star. How do you do skills first hiring? Who's done it? Who's doing it well? Tell me about your experience. Tell me how you did it. Tell me where I start. Tell me what jobs. Tell me how I prepare my hiring managers and my people managers. How do you make sure that talent has transparent career pathways, right? That this is more than hiring. This is about hiring, advancement, promotion, thriving. How do you use apprenticeships as a way to hire and upskill and train folks? All the things that you can think of that go into the practices, the culture, the change management that the companies actually have to bring about. That's what we wrestle with in the context of the community of practice. We have a track for the CEOs, and it's a commitment that the CEOs have to make. And we have a track for the CHROs as well. The fourth piece is the companies are actually putting money in the game as well. So the coalition requires resources to do its work. And so the companies are making an annual financial contribution to the 110 Coalition, which is incorporated as a 501c3. And then the final piece is that 10-year commitment. We're saying we're trying to change the companies in a fundamental way, partner with Black talent to help Black talent transform the trajectories of their families, and humbly, but unabashedly, change the country. And as I say, we don't think you can do that in 10 months. right? And so we're asking for a 10-year commitment to this journey. Now, we know that if we fix this issue, that more than Black talent without four-year degrees will be impacted, right? I just mentioned to you, 66% of all talent don't have four-year degrees. This is a systemic barrier that is talent-wide. So we're focused on a particular cohort and we're focused intensely. But our expectation is that this is a systemic transformation that's going to benefit a number of different groups. Black talent with four-year degrees, white talent without four-year, that this is going to impact companies and families all over the country. Now, not just any jobs, right? So for us, for the jobs to count toward that 1 million journey, the jobs have to have four attributes. One, they have to pay a living wage. And we use the MIT living wage calculator to discern what that is by metropolitan area. Two, the jobs, what do I say? They cannot be jobs at risk of not being around, of being automated out in the short term. Three, jobs cannot have a four-year degree requirement as a gateway. And by the way, people can certainly get four-year degrees along the way. In fact, this is not an anti-four-year degree effort. This is about it not being a gating mechanism for an opportunity. And then the final piece is the level of work experience. Again, this is the gateway piece. Less than 5 years work experience. Any jobs that have these four attributes count for the 110 journey. Every manufacturing job that has these attributes are jobs that count for the 4-year journey. And just to do a little bit of a sidebar, I am incredibly excited about the opportunity to partner with manufacturers because we believe that some of the best quality jobs out there and opportunities out there are in the manufacturing sector. And so I'm looking forward, I'm grateful that you've given me a chance to chat with you because I'm looking forward to a sustained partnership with you to go at this opportunity. So these are the jobs for us that count. A lot here, but let me give you what this is all about. The work itself is about building and scaling an ecosystem. The ecosystem starts on the demand side with companies and jobs. But the second piece is the talent developers that we have to bring to the table in order to make sure that we're equipping the talent to be successful. What this slide gives you a sense of is that talent development component of the ecosystem that we're bringing to the family. So it ranges from community colleges and junior colleges to 2-year HBCUs to nonprofit boot camps to military transition programs to these online platforms. What we're doing is we're doing a quality check. We're going out, we're recruiting and endorsing organizations in this space, in this field, whose track record suggests they can produce the product that you're looking for. Talent that has the skill sets and the aptitudes to learn more skills to do the jobs excellently that you have. That's the second piece of the ecosystem. The third piece is obviously the talent, right? We would source that talent or are sourcing that talent first and foremost through their relationships with the talent developers, right? There are 1,000 community colleges across the country that we are reaching out to that are right now, as we speak, educating over 350,000 Black talent, Black students. And so part of our sourcing strategy is our partnerships with those organizations that are in that business. We're also doing direct marketing, partnerships with the Urban League and the NAACP and faith-based organizations and CDCs. We're scattering multiple channels to bring the talent to the table. The fourth piece of the ecosystem that is not explicit on here that I should mention is the wraparound support. So I'll give you an example. We've got a company that has a manufacturing operation in the Philadelphia area, but it's outside of Philly. It is 45 minutes outside of Philly in West Point. I think I've been staying within the walls, but forgive me if I haven't. We're sourcing talent for them from North Philly. Well, that talent, if it took public transportation to get to the facility in West Point, would have a 90-minute minimum commute each way. Guess who raised their hand for that commute, right? So we partnered with a transportation organization who is giving talent for the first year a ride to and from work, right? So we know that if you really want talent to thrive, yes, the hard and soft skills, we need those, but childcare, transportation, mentors and coaches, mental wellness, that's got to be part of the package as well. So the fourth piece of the ecosystem that we're curating for this effort are the wraparound or talent supports. We have a tech platform that has all of these players on it. Companies are uploading jobs, talent developers are uploading their boot camps and their catalogs. Talent is coming on and being matched with jobs and talent developers. Employers are receiving hits that suggests matches from the talent. It's an AI-driven platform. Virtually, all of this is being linked. Secondly, we've picked right now 25 markets around the country where there's an overlap of demand and Black talent. And we're doing it the old-fashioned way as well. Hand-to-hand, relationship-to-relationship, organization-to-organization, ecosystem building, right? It's old school now, right? But we're doing it as COVID allows. This effort is about scaling that ecosystem. That's what this effort is about. There are membership options for this, but I won't bore you with those. The bottom line is we have large companies, we have mid-sized companies, we have small companies, we have associations. We welcome all of them into the 110 journey. Let me pause on this one. So for a company to actually meet its aspirations with respect to hires and promotes, there's several ways. First is just the direct hires and promotes of the company, right, that they make. The second is the promotions, right, that they also achieve. But what I wanted to follow up on or make sure I highlight is companies also can meet their goals or aspirations through the hires of their suppliers and vendors. So some companies have recruited their hires and vendors to be partners with them on the 110 journey, which we love. The one piece that we're not counting toward the 110 journey, but we know we're impacting, are actually additional hires of folks into jobs requiring bachelor degrees. We love that that's happening. We definitely want to impact that, but we're not counting that toward our million. Okay. That is the 110 journey. I won't bore you with any of this stuff, but I'm happy to share this deck with you as we proceed. But I started in March of this year, and I looked at the end of October to see where we were. Since March, we're already over 20,000 hires and promotes, 60 companies. What that tells me is this is doable. Now, at steady state, we want to be over 100,000 a year, right? So it also tells me we got a lot of work. We have a lot of work, but because of the commitment of the CEOs, because of the commitment of the talent developers, because there are 11 million or 10 million Black talent right now that we count who are in the workforce who have already the skills to do work of greater responsibility and greater pay, this is doable. The raw ingredients are there. It really is about how quickly can we build and scale that ecosystem that I was mentioning. We need more laborers in the vineyard. That's the bottom line.
Thank you, Maurice. The work you are doing is so important. I'd be remiss not to remind everyone about the NAM's Pledge for Action that Carolyn mentioned earlier. You can act now and sign your company up for that pledge and share your commitments to be counted among those companies who are leading change. You can do this by going to www.nam.org/pledge-for-action, and we will put that in the chat as well. Our next session focuses on an often overlooked workforce population, our second chance talent. 1 in 4 Americans currently possess a criminal record. Without second chance opportunities, many in this sizable talent pool are excluded from the workforce, needlessly leaving them on the sidelines as employers search for candidates who can fill open jobs, currently 1 million open jobs in our industry. So please join me in welcoming Cassie Zumbiel, the Director of Workforce Programs and Policy for the Institute.
Hello, and thank you, AJ. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you all about second chance hiring. As AJ said, I am Cassie Zumbiel. I'm the Director of Workforce Programs and Policy with the Manufacturing Institute. So what is second chance hiring and what brought us here today? Second chance hiring, as you all probably are aware, is the focus on hiring individuals with prior convictions. Back in April, we launched our second chance hiring initiative in partnership with the Charles Koch Institute, who's our funder, and Stand Together, who we're working in partnership for this initiative. As AJ mentioned, 1 in 4 Americans have possessed a criminal record, and it truly is creating challenges for our workforce, excluding them from the talent pool. And when we say second chance, you may also hear fair chance hiring, prior justice involvement, individuals with prior convictions. There are a lot of different terms that are used when discussing this work. And so I think it's important to know we're talking about all of those things. And the terms are just different definitions of kind of the same topic. So why should you care about second chance hiring? What does it mean for you as a business? One is it widens your talent pool. I'm sure you've heard multiple times today that right now we have 900,000 open jobs in manufacturing, and we just simply can't afford to leave these folks on the sideline. With 1 in 4 individuals who have a prior conviction, as well as individuals in this population typically have 5 times the average unemployment rate compared to individuals without a prior conviction. There's a lot of folks who are looking for jobs right now that are simply not able to find them because of their prior conviction. Another reason is it decreases your turnover. We've seen through companies who have been engaged in this work that individuals who have prior convictions or justice involvement tend to stay longer and be just as productive, if not more productive, than the average individual who comes in for employment. They also have more loyalty. It's hard to find a job in this population. And so being able to find an employer who is loyal to you, you want to be loyal back to them. And so it does decrease your turnover, which then also decreases cost. It also helps you stay competitive. You can see from that quote from Jeff Korzanik, who's written the book on second chance hiring, the successful CEO of the future will be the one who can manage through the coming talent shortage. This is going to be so essential, and we can't afford to leave anyone on the sidelines. So it'll be really essential for the future of businesses and your companies to be considering all talent that has the skills and the capability to fill the roles. And then finally, I think this is the least important reason, but something that is important to be aware of is you can also access incentives. The Work Opportunity Tax Credit, as well as the federal bonding program, are both out there for companies who are engaged in this work and are possible for you to take advantage of if you're engaged in second chance hiring. So what's the perception of this? It's really, I'm sure you've heard a lot more about second chance hiring in the past year. It's really become a big topic. And it's important to kind of know, what do people really think about second chance hiring? SHRM has collected a lot of great data through their Getting Talent Back to Work initiative. And they found that 80% of Americans support expanding second chance hiring practices. If you look at the statistic of 1 in 4 individuals who have a prior conviction, that means about 50% of the population in America is impacted by this one way or another, whether that means a family member or a friend. A lot of people are impacted by the justice system, and most Americans support second chance hiring practices. As well as 85% of HR professionals believe that workers with criminal records perform their jobs as well or better than individuals who don't. We actually have data that supports that. I'll be talking about one of our initiatives in San Antonio in a little bit, but from all the data they've collected from all of the individuals they've hired, they've shown that they actually are more productive than the individuals who come in without prior convictions. And then both of these, I think everyone watching and here today knows this, but 64% of millennials will not take a job without a connection to corporate social responsibility. And 91% of millennials said that they would switch to a brand with a cause. Second chance hiring, we approach it from a workforce development perspective because we really think that's the main reason that you should be engaged in this. But it's also the right thing to do for your community. It's the right thing to do for your other employees. There's a lot of great reasons to be engaged in this work, and having the awareness that this is something that your other employees value is important. So we really have approached this from a two-pronged approach. We've learned from companies and community-based organizations that have been engaged in this for quite some time that there needs to be a focus on both hiring and retaining. It's not just about getting people in the door, but it's about how do you keep them. And then also, there's kind of two approaches that make companies the most successful. One is by looking internally. So what are the HR changes, the company changes that you need to take on in order to make this successful to both hire and retain? And then also, what are the external relationships that are necessary? I'm going to talk a little bit about community-based organizations and the role that they play in this work, but they're extremely essential in order to be successful. So it's important to know that there's those internal HR things, but also thinking about this externally as well. So I'm going to jump into some of those best practices now. So let's start with, this is kind of the whole process to get someone hired, right? You have the job postings and applications, you have the interviews, you have the background checks, and then you have the individual reviews. So there's best practices, many best practices in each of those areas, but I'm going to hit on a couple for each of them. So let's start with the job posting and applications. That's the first time someone's getting to know you as a company. They're seeing that job posting, they're looking at your company website, and they're trying to figure out who you are and what you're about. That's the most important place to be really honest that you're a second chance employer. You don't want to hide that. That's not something you don't want people to know about. You should be proud about it, and you should be telling your applicants that that's out there. Another big thing that you've heard about, I'm sure, is removing those upfront disclosures. That is something that has been found to be a best practice because then you're getting people more comfortable to apply. But for me, one of the things that I've learned a lot about is just really talking about being a second chance employer and telling folks about it, because you don't know how many individuals you're losing by not saying it out loud. There might be folks who are coming to apply and don't see that there and get scared that they're not even going to make it through the process because of their prior conviction. So being really open and honest about that is one of the best practices there. Then interviewing. So let's hope those individuals get to the interview stage. What does that mean? You want to make sure that you're setting really clear expectations on who you are as a company and what you are open to. You also want to have strength-based questions and a clear focus on accomplishments. One of the best practices that individuals are being told now is to be open about their prior convictions during the interview process. They're being told that it's important to have those conversations up front rather than waiting until a background check comes back. So from an HR perspective, that may be something new that a hiring manager, if it's second chance hiring is new for your company, has never taken on before. So having an understanding that a lot of individuals while they're incarcerated are actually gaining skills. They're either gaining education skills, job skills, they may be going through a training program while they're incarcerated, and having conversations and feeling comfortable to ask questions about that is something that's important for the hiring manager to feel comfortable about. There's a lot of language there and it's not always comfortable. And so we do have some guides that can help begin those conversations, as well as lots of experts who can really help HR managers understand what that looks like. But I think the most important thing to know is that having those conversations is something that we should all start to get more comfortable with. So then background checks. I think that's the piece that comes up a lot when you're thinking about second chance hiring, and it should, because often that's the place where everything stops. So there are some best practices with background checks. There's a lot of best practices with background checks, but I'm going to highlight just a couple. So first, the look back period. There's an opportunity to change working with your background provider to no longer look forever back, to look at someone's full history. You can look back 3 to 7 years. 7 years seems to be the sweet spot for a lot of employers to begin to think through, how far back do I really need to know about their last conviction for it really to be applicable for this job? Is something that happened 25 years ago going to really impact their ability to be successful on the job now? So that's a conversation you can have with your background check provider in order to begin to think through how you can bring more folks in rather than thinking about that full time of their lifespan. Also, you can talk to your background check provider about only showing you specific convictions. You don't need necessarily to know every single conviction someone's had. You can see only the ones that are applicable to the job that they're being hired for. So one of the best practices we've seen is companies going through every single job posting they have and thinking through what are really the convictions that I can't have for that role, and making sure your background check providers know that. And anything else doesn't really matter. And it doesn't really need to be something that you're finding out from your background check provider. So that's another thing that you can do, which then leads me to the individual reviews. So hopefully you get that background check back. And instead of having a red light, which is automatically, I'm not going to hire someone because they have this conviction, start to think about having yellow lights, where that then allows you to have conversations and get feedback from individuals about their convictions. Everyone's a full person who has full experiences, and one thing on a piece of paper really never tells the full story. So having conversations with individuals, providing them an opportunity to give feedback on their conviction, the circumstances and any rehabilitation efforts that they've seen is something that has really provided a lot of companies an opportunity to better get to know their candidates and see if they're really going to be the right fit for the role. We've actually seen this in our pilot in San Antonio, which I'll talk more about in a little bit, but they actually have, after the background check, they provide individuals with an opportunity to give feedback written, and they even ask a lot of questions to be able to bring that out so an individual feels open. And they also tell them, we're not asking you this to get you in more trouble or to scare you. This is us getting to know you as a person, a full person. So really explaining that, because sometimes companies just send those out and say, we saw you have prior conviction, tell us what it is. And it's just terrifying, and you don't know what that means, and you're afraid that means you're going to lose the job after you have a conditional offer. So also explaining that an individual review is actually a great opportunity, not something that should be scary, is another best practice. So those are just a few of the HR best practices. We have quite a few. We have guides on our website that really talk through that, and there's a lot there that can be done. So then building community partnerships. This is personally one of my favorite parts about this work. There are community partners all across the country who are engaged in second chance hiring and working with individuals who have prior justice involvement. They are doing amazing work and want to talk to you as an employer. They will be so happy if you call them because they have great candidates who are looking for jobs, and that's really the role that they play. So as an employer, you have an opportunity to both identify who the right partners are, as well as then engage with them. It's not just send me all of your candidates, give me referrals. It's also that level of engagement and partnership between you and the employer. So what does that look like? Well, we've put together a community partnership scorecard that has multiple different sections that really talk through the different things that are essential to have a good community partner. One is work readiness support. We often hear from employers that employability skills or soft skills are one of the number one thing from all candidates that seem to be missing at times. So most community-based organizations who are engaged in this space do some type of work readiness support, whether it's while someone is still incarcerated or after they've been released. They talk through what does it look like to have relationships with the manager? How do you deal with conflict? This is something that I would have conversations with a community partner about before engaging with them to understand what role they play there. Also reentry support. So a lot of individuals who are dealing with a prior conviction are also dealing with other challenges too, whether it's housing insecurities, food insecurities, lots of different challenges that could be there. And having a community-based organization who can play the role of supporting individuals with those reentry supports is a really good thing for you as an employer to have. As well as there's lots of different staffing options when it comes to community-based organizations. Some do more of a temporary staffing where they can come in and just learn about the roles you have available. Others do direct to hire where they bring someone on full-time with you. So really understanding what is their staffing model is a good place to ask questions. As well as referrals. How many people in scale? How many people do they have interacting with their program? What is the scale they've worked with other employers? These are questions that I would begin to have conversations about. And then also the ongoing support. One of the best practices we've seen is the role of community-based organizations to play ongoing support once someone is hired. A lot of times they're called a success coach or something along those lines where they actually come in once a week and meet with individuals who are now on the job and talk to them about those barriers. They don't just go away because you got a job all of a sudden. If you had housing insecurities before, it might take a little while for you to get to a place where that's no longer there. Or if you're having transportation challenges because originally your mom said she was going to drive you to work every day and then no longer is able to. Well, what do you do about that? For a lot of individuals, that means they don't show up to work the next day. Well, if they have that ongoing support and that relationship with a community-based organization, they now have someone they can reach out to and say, I'm dealing with this challenge. What solutions do you think there are? as well as training opportunities. This one's especially unique for manufacturers. A lot of times there is that need for some sort of prior training before employment. And so a lot of community-based organizations offer that, and having conversations about the credentials and the certifications that they offer will set you up to understand what roles these folks can fill. I think sometimes in this work, there's a perception that we're only talking about production roles. That's not at all what we're saying. Individuals come with a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different experiences. And so having an understanding of what roles they're able to fill and what roles they're able to fill because of training that they've been offered is really important. And then finally, their experience is always an important conversation topic, as well as their evaluation skills. This is one that's really important to me. Having an understanding of how are they evaluating success? Is it just job placement or is it retention? Trying to understand how they're collecting that data is really important, and overall leads to a long-term success between you and them as a community partner. So we have this scorecard on our website. It's a great tool, a great conversation starter as you're reaching out to community-based organizations, and something I would strongly encourage if you get engaged in second chance hiring. So what are the resources we have? We have office hours. So we open up once a month for 2 hours virtually where any manufacturer can join. We bring on experts who can answer any questions you have. Sometimes questions are a little awkward to ask if you don't know a lot about this space in front of large groups. So we actually have private sessions we offer 4 or 5 private sessions, and then we have an open session where anyone can join and be a part of the conversation. We have webinars. So if you go on our website, we have multiple webinars that are a great place to hear from employers who've been successful in this space and kind of learn more about these best practices. We've done some research. We have case studies. So overall, you all should leave this conversation feeling like, okay, I know where to go if I want to get started. And one of the things that we've done since we launched in April is actually launched 2 pilots. So we have one with Union Pacific, and it's launching in Houston as their first site. And then we also have one in San Antonio. The one in San Antonio has been amazing. It actually started with one employer who's been doing second chance hiring since 2018 and approached us and said, I think other employers could do this too. How do we bring them on? So we've been engaged with them, and now it's spread to 4 or 5 other employers, as well as working with community-based organizations there. We actually have a short video that I wanted to show all of you about this work. So if we can play the video, please.
Some people don't get a second chance. I came from, bad neighborhood, and, I got in trouble at an early age. You can't just judge a person from their past.
I ran into issue with the law, lost my job, and nobody was hiring because of the background issue I had.
The biggest challenge that I would say the manufacturers are facing today is really just finding the workforce that we need. When we started this initiative, we were the only company that was actively targeting the justice-involved population, and we weren't really sure what the outcome was going to be. What we have found is the justice-involved population historically has outperformed individuals that come into us through normal recruiting methods. We have to start thinking creatively and thinking outside of the box. We had to bring those community resources to the table that had the expertise.
So in 2018, the Reentry Center was approached by a manufacturing company to see if she could recruit employees.
There are a lot of partners that are working together. Our office is just one component of what we're trying to achieve here with the Second Chance program. We have to have private industry willing to embrace those individuals that just because they've made a mistake, then that employer ought to give that person an opportunity to prove themselves.
The way that we rolled out our Second Chance program, first and foremost, we worked with our attorney. We needed to figure out what policies could we change, and then how do we structure that program. We looked for the experts in our community that worked with those issues of removing barriers, and brought them to the table.
We heard that another company on campus was doing the Second Chance program. They had a really good success rate. In order to move forward I did have to get approval from the president of UTEX and the plant manager. We thought it would be a good opportunity for us also.
They're offering a career, not just a $7 an hour job.
And my family is so proud of me. This would make me feel good about waking up coming there, because my mama got a smile this big. I know if they seeing that I did it and I'm still here, it could happen for them too.
I'm glad there's various company that is taking this initiative to hire and giving a person a second chance. This is a rewarding program for the employer and employees.
The Second Chance program could be a solution for us getting people in the door.
We have an opportunity to engage this population.
If we're able to bring in more individuals through the second chance hiring, it means more opportunities for our company. It gives us that confidence that we can go after new business. We can continue to grow and offer those opportunities to other individuals.
I'm very excited about that. We just are releasing this as of this week. So very excited about this. It's been amazing to get to see the impact that this work has had on their community and individuals there. As you saw, Don and John, they love their jobs. They're so excited. John actually just got to buy a house for his kids for the first time. And Don, this was his first job ever. He never had employment prior to this. And so getting to hear him talk about the impact of his first job and how he had to learn how to file taxes and just the impact of this was so exciting. But then to also hear it from the employer's standpoint, the employers have been so impacted by this work. They really do believe that this is how they're going to build their talent pipeline over time. So very excited, as you can tell from the smile on my face, about this work. And some of the best practices we've seen just from this pilot alone is having multiple employers come together, basically on any workforce development initiative, tends to have a bigger impact. You get more buy-in from community partners, you get more buy-in from individuals, because they also know that then it's not just one opportunity they have, it's a whole community of opportunities. So working with multiple employers is always the best practice that we like to see, as well as community partners, as I've already talked about. But as you saw in this video, the district attorney is bought in and is talking about this publicly and really believes that this is an alternative pathway for individuals instead of just incarceration, as well as the Reentry Center, who's really interacting with these individuals as they're trying to figure out what's next after they've gone through some justice involvement. And then the Success Coach model I talked about a little bit, but I didn't tell you who's doing that. It's actually the local workforce board. So they're playing a role in doing the boot camp that we have actually the week before someone comes on full time. They run a boot camp and teach them safety skills and those employability skills and how they can find the local supports in their community. And so the Success Coach is really essential. And that local workforce board, I think that's a unique opportunity that they haven't played in a lot of other places in the country. And then continuous improvement. They don't think that this is done. We don't just have the model and it's perfect and we're not going to do anything to change. They're constantly looking for new partners, new opportunities, ways to continue to support this population internally and externally. So very excited about this and excited to see kind of where it goes. I shouldn't even call it a pilot anymore because they've been very clear this isn't going anywhere. So very excited about this work.
Thank you, Cassie. I love to see the questioning of our processes and procedures, like background checks in the chat. It's a great best practice to continually reassess our potential for biases. I also saw the question about the video. It will be released publicly. We will be able to share that and make sure you all have that as well. Our next session actually focuses on a new report that we launched earlier this month with our partners at AARP on multi-generational teams in manufacturing. As we all know too well, our industry is experiencing a double-edged problem. We struggle to fill new positions, and while 5% of the existing workforce is already beyond retirement age, and an additional 20% will reach retirement age within the next decade. As a result, it's just become so important for manufacturers to ensure knowledge transfer, retention, and upskilling all occur. So please welcome Heather Tinsley-Fix, Senior Advisor at AARP.
So First, I wanted to address why age diversity matters. Probably not a hard thing to convince you all of, but I thought I would go over just a couple of data points for you. The first is that we have some interesting demographic changes that have been occurring over the last 50 to 100 years. I love this slide because, or this graphic because it shows the change in a demographic chart that looks like a pyramid, which we're kind of used to thinking of a demographic chart. We have a lot of babies at the bottom of the chart. You know, we have, as you go up, there are fewer and fewer older folks. But there are two trends that are affecting this pyramid and turning it from a pyramid kind of into a pillar. And those two trends are a huge jump in the life expectancy in the United States. It did dip a little bit, obviously, last year. But in the main, globally and in the United States, lives are getting longer, lifespans are extending. The good health is extending farther into that lifespan. And so we're seeing, we're really witnessing the birth of a 100-year life. And so that's one big change affecting this pillar. The other is declining birth rates. This is not true globally consistently, although it is true in a lot of first world countries, and it's certainly true in the US. In 2018, the birth rate fell to its lowest point in 30 years. So we have fewer and fewer babies being born, and we have people living longer. So that's why the prediction, this is from the census, the United States Census, that in 2060 we'll have way more of a pillar than a pyramid. And what this means for the workforce is that the workforce, which is already generationally diverse, is likely to remain so. We have in 2035, again, this is from the census, I didn't put this graphic in, but in 2035, people 65 and older will outnumber children 18 and under in the US for the first time. So that's one of the first things I wanted to mention about why age diversity matters. It's because the labor force is age diverse. Another point that I want to make on this is that the skill landscape is shifting. It's shifting very quickly, as I'm sure you all feel every day in your work. And as automation begins to take over a lot of our job tasks, the types of skills and the types of skills that are needed that remain tend to be either hybrid skills or what we like to call uniquely human skills. I put this in from the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs 2020 report from last year, and it really struck me when I read this particular chart that of the top 15 skills that they predict will be in demand in 2025, we do not get to a technical skill until number 7 on the list. And if you take a look at the majority of the skills on this list, they are these hybrid or soft skills or human skills. So things like critical thinking, judgment, leadership, resilience, the ability to work together collaboratively. So these are all skills that tend to take time to develop. They're skills that tend to be passed in mentoring relationships or person to person or on the job experience. And so in this way, age diversity at work is a really valuable way to not only capture these kind of skills that older workers tend to have and tend to pass down, but it's a great way to bolster the skills of your younger workforce. So shifting skill sets are another reason why age diversity matters at work in general. And then the third point I want to make is that research has shown that mixed age teams specifically perform better than teams with less age diversity. Now, this is interesting because we know that diversity of any kind improves team performance, right? Because it tends to provide diversity of experience and perspective and those things too. But the theory around why age diversity specifically at the team level matters is the notion of knowledge spillover, right? So if you have a team that's a high-functioning team, so you've got an inclusive environment, a safe environment, everyone's working towards the same goals, you can have a situation where there's a lot of knowledge spillover. And when you have older workers, mid-career workers, younger workers, that knowledge sharing is invaluable. It's like, particularly for transmitting the knowledge from the older to the younger workforce, it's like getting a 2-for-1. You've got the actual contributions of the older workers, but you also have this passing of this knowledge down. And so this research actually comes out of Germany, out of the manufacturing industry in Germany, and I have the sources in the notes if you want to take a look at those sources. But this research showed that in companies that utilized mixed age teams, the productivity was higher, and the work outputs were better on creative tasks, judgment, problem-solving tasks. It didn't have an effect on sort of rote tasks, but it did on these sort of more complex tasks. So age diversity is good for team performance. Again, I think this is probably not news to you all, so now I would like to actually cover sort of the state of age diversity in the manufacturing industry. And this report that we've just put out on Tuesday that AJ mentioned really is I recommend it to you all. It's a great read, and it really dives into a lot of the detail. I'm just going to kind of cover out the top points. So in terms of the current workforce, I mentioned that there are 5 generations. The circle graph on the left is, I pulled that from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's from last year. It's a little difficult to sort of guesstimate the generations because they don't fall into neat 10 or 5-year increments, which is the way that BLS provides its data. But you can see that we do have a good amount of Gen Z already in the workforce, 11% of the whole US workforce. Millennials are the biggest group. They're at, I don't have my glasses, I can't see, I think it's 34%. But Gen X, me, don't forget Gen X, we do exist, the data proves it, is still 33% of the workforce, and a good amount too are boomers, 21% of the workforce. Still a few of our traditionalists or greatest generation hanging on there, and that's invaluable as well. So as the traditionalists start to phase out, we're going to start to see Gen Alpha come in. That's my son's generation. So they're about 10 years away from joining the workforce. In terms of the manufacturing industry specifically, you can see that these percentages largely match up. This is, again, coming from the same probably data set, but different ways of estimating the generations. The manufacturing industry skews a little bit older than the general workforce. So almost 26% are baby boomers and silent generation. Gen X, 23%. So the mid-career is kind of a thinner layer for the manufacturing industry. A good amount of the millennials, though, 43.6%, and Gen Z is starting to come in as well. One of the things that's really interesting, another really interesting finding from this report, is that there's a lot of emphasis right now among the companies we surveyed on, let's get some younger people in. We need to hold on to our older workers, and we need to bring in the younger generation. And you can sort of see that reflected in these percentages. But we also wanted to find out how the manufacturing industry feels about age diversity in general and mixed age teams. The great, I love, working with and talking to the manufacturing industry because it makes me feel good about what I do. It's harder when you're talking to the tech industry, right? But there's a very high valuing of all ages in the folks we surveyed. In terms of teams specifically, there are a great deal, 60% on average of companies value and are working with engaging their teams specifically around multi-generational. But about 10% are struggling with how to manage mixed age teams, and close to 30% aren't addressing it at all. So while there is a strong bias towards the value of age diversity, there's still some work to be done. There is a lot of awareness in the industry around, the aging of the workforce, the value of older workers, and yet the action that's being taken is not there as much. So only 14% of companies surveyed said that they've taken steps to recruit and retain older workers. So I think it's something that we all are aware of, we know about, we want to do something about, but we're sort of still trying to figure out the best way to address it. This report will help you definitely in that regard. We also wanted to know, okay, so you value the multi-generational workforce. How do you leverage that? What does that look like in your organizations on the factory floor? And we found, interestingly, and this is a little bit different from when we survey other industries, other employers in other industries, that the majority of manufacturing mixed age teams use is around promoting creativity and productivity. creativity and innovation. And I love that finding because, and there are a lot of, I've got some quotes I want to read as well, because we don't often hear that when we talk to other industries. You know, they'll say things like, they'll say things that tend to fall into very stereotypical assumptions. Well, our older workers are wise and our younger workers are fast, you know, or whatever. And we, you know, we use them for those reasons, or we value them for those reasons. But they don't usually associate mixed age teams or multi-generational teams with innovation and creativity. So I love that this is the top finding for us with the manufacturing industry. Again, there are lots of ways to leverage mixed age teams. You can see them here. But in general, there's definitely seems to be an acknowledgement. Again, it's more anecdotal than based on data, that a mix of ages improves productivity, increases problem solving, and just helps overall with the bottom line. Okay, so in terms of trying to talk to the, you know, looking for the bright spots or the where folks are actually paying attention to this and really doing something specific about it, we uncovered best practices in 4 key areas. And the first is to formalize policies, particularly around, you know, phased retirement, offering that flexibility, and establishing a clear system of knowledge transfer. I'm going to cover that a little bit later. Expanding the recruitment pipeline is another key area for best practices. So really making a concerted effort to go after late and mid-career workers, to upskill the existing workforce. So you need to have kind of obviously an array of recruitment strategies. Emphasizing the value of age diversity is another area for best practices in terms of building age-inclusive organizations and managing mixed age teams. You want to make sure that you include age in your diversity trainings. Consider issuing a public statement on the value of, you know, multi-generational teams or age diversity at work. Making sure that you're really deliberate about honoring retirees' contributions. This has a strong effect on morale of younger workers as well as the folks who have retired, because the younger workers can see a path forward. They can see a way of staying with the organization, that this is a family that, you know, is really valuing you from the beginning to the end. And lastly, doing research with your employees, doing those surveys, getting feedback on what their needs are. You know, it's always good to survey rather than assume. So what benefits are of use to you? What kind of flexibility do you want? You know, what sort of retirement options do you want? Do you want to phase in, or do you want to be hired back as a contractor on an as-needed basis? Finding that out, talking to your employees across the life course is really important. So I wanted to dive into a couple of things in a little bit more detail that are listed in the best practices. And the first is knowledge transfer. So certainly when I talk to the manufacturing industry, but also the energy industry, I hear this a lot, that knowledge transfer is everything. How do you accomplish it? Because it's a big topic. It sounds good, but how do you actually go about it? And so there are you know, usually thought of 3 different types of knowledge that you're trying to transfer. The first is the easiest. That's explicit knowledge, right? So in my example here, explicit knowledge is a recipe. Okay, so let's say a recipe for bread. That's the easiest to document and the easiest to transmit. The second is implicit knowledge, which is when you take that knowledge and apply it in a real world setting. So in this case, that would be like, you know, measuring the flour, cracking the eggs, whatever. That's pretty easy to teach as well. The third type of knowledge is the hardest to teach. It's tacit knowledge. And in this example, it would be, okay, so you've made the dough. When do you stop kneading? That's experiential knowledge. It's harder to transmit, and that is the kind of knowledge that needs to be transferred in through programs like mentoring, through job sharing or job shadowing. And so that's probably the most valuable stuff that you have to transfer. I would also argue that there's a fourth type of knowledge transfer that needs to occur when people are considering retirement, and that is their networks, the relationships that they have, right? So let's say you're on the regulatory side of things and you have relationships with local regulators. If you have an ability to transition that person slowly into retirement and train their replacement, have them make sure that they create those introductions and help form those relationships before they leave, because a lot of times in not every profession, but in a lot of professions, relationships are key to success. So I would actually argue that it's important to pay attention to that as well when you're looking at a knowledge transfer strategy. I found that when I was doing research on this a couple of years ago, I found this company called Steve Troutman Company, which is a man called Steve Troutman, it's his company. And he came up with what I consider to be a really interesting way of identifying, being strategic about knowledge transfer. And you can see here, he proposes creating, mapping out the knowledge silos in your organization and sort of figuring out, okay, how deep is the bench? Do we only have one person who can do this, or do we have three? Is this person an expert, and are they sort of in danger of retiring, or are they sort of looking to retire? And so mapping out that, providing that grid of where the knowledge resides, how deep the bench is, and how critical or in some ways unique that skill set is to that person, you know where to focus your efforts. Also, framing the questions around the what, to get at the knowledge behind the process or the tool or the policy is really helpful. So, for example, what would happen if this process didn't go according to the documented process? Why is this person important to getting the work done? Asking those kinds of questions is a way of digging underneath and getting to that implicit and tacit knowledge that you want to transfer. And then, as I said, don't forget to factor in relationships both inside and outside the organization. Okay, upskilling and reskilling. This is it used to be future of work was the hot topic. This is now the hot topic among workforce development conversations. Again, this is from the World Economic Forum. This graph makes me kind of exhausted whenever I look at it because 50% of workers' jobs are going to be changing and require reskilling, and 40% are expected to have a significant shift in their job duties. So this means everybody, right? This isn't just folks on the cutting edge. This is me, this is you. Everyone is going to need to be continually reskilling. And so that's something that everyone's really wrestling with, governments and academic institutions and private enterprise. How are we going to accomplish this? Oops, I went backwards, sorry. I recently developed a presentation on age-inclusive approaches to upskilling and reskilling, and I sort of condensed it here just to one slide, but a couple of things to keep in mind. It's really important to adopt a growth mindset, when it comes to learning and development. You don't want to fall into old opinions that, young people learn really fast, they're eager to learn, older people are slow and they aren't interested in learning. Our research does not bear that out, and I'm sure your anecdotal personal experience doesn't bear that out. So make sure that you promote a growth mindset across your organizations. Promote opportunities for upskilling and reskilling across age groups. This is something, again, that it's easy to sort of fall back on assumptions and say, well, we've got this new training program, we really want to get our younger folks in it. We should do that, absolutely, but make sure you're deliberate about promoting these training opportunities to mid and late career workers as well. Provide training in a variety of formats. I have another slide on this that I found really interesting from a report out of McKinsey. It's everybody has different learning styles, right? And that does not so much to do with age as it just is with different, different learning styles. So it's important to have a variety of formats. You can have asynchronous, you can have online, you can have in-person. You can do less formal things like I was saying with job shadowing and job sharing. It's important to accept different learning styles, right? So not everybody learns super fast. One of the things that's interesting to me about brain plasticity is that we have different peaks of intelligence at different times of life. And our fluid intelligence, which is our throughput, our memory recall, the speed with which we absorb and remember information, that peaks at 20. But that doesn't mean that our brains are done then, right? So other types of intelligence, emotional intelligence, peak later. And so accept that there are different learning speeds and different learning styles. And leverage your age diversity at work for informal soft skills training, right? That could be as formal as a mentoring program or as informal as just pairing up older and younger workers. I wanted to put this slide in here because I found this to be so interesting. This report is from McKinsey. It's pretty recent, and it's about upskilling at scale. So it's kind of talking about the upskilling issue. And they found that the more formats that companies provided different training opportunities in, the greater the success of that knowledge retention. In other words, their training strategies had better chance of success the more formats they provided. So, and again, all of these sources are in the notes section, so you can take a look at that later. Okay, and then last point I wanted to make here, sort of in a more deep dive, is I'm sure lots of you feel this way, you know, like holding on to those older workers. Don't leave, please. Don't walk out the door. There's a big shift going on right now, a lot of upheaval. We have the Great Resignation in September of this year. More people resigned than in the last 20 years since the Bureau of Labor Statistics has been tracking it. At the same time, 3.2 million more baby boomers retired last year than they did in the third quarter of 2019. So there's a lot of people leaving and a lot of people looking for jobs. There's a huge upheaval right now, which is causing a lot of stress in the recruiting field. So we definitely know that there is, you know, the pandemic made it sort of gave a lot of older workers a sort of push, like, you know what, I can bridge, I can make it the next 2 years without working. I'm going to go ahead and retire. And that's, you know, that's all that knowledge walking out the door. So there are a couple things you can do to retain your older workers flexibly. And in fact, to retain any worker flexibly, if there's caregiving challenges or if they're, you know, I need to lean out to reskill. All of these types of retention strategies that work for holding on to older workers are good for holding on to any of your workers. So phased retirement is one of those, and that has a pretty long track record. We actually have that at AARP, so you can do it for as long as you want. You just have to have a formal plan with your manager. So that's one way. You can rehire folks back as contractors. I know that often happens in manufacturing and in the energy industry, because you have workers who have, you know, they're ready to kind of like slow down and not be working 40 hours a week, and yet they want to still remain and be involved. And so, you know, having them on a kind of as needed basis to come in and fill in on shifts or provide training in certain spots, it's really great to have that, have them there. Returnships, this is a great way specifically to get women back in the workforce who've taken a break for raising a family or for other caregiving. So that's always an option. It may not be so much for the factory floor, but you guys can tell me, I don't know, maybe that works there too. Pivoting, so job pivots to less demanding roles. That's what this particular article that I've captured here talks about. This man worked in he was in a spring manufacturing company, and he was on the floor, and he started to get, you know, he was like, you know, I really think this is getting a little bit too physically demanding. The company didn't want to lose him, so they said, okay, why don't you transition into the sort of the back office where the work orders are generated? And as soon as he got there, they gave him some training. He started immediately influencing the way that the folks that created the work orders did their job, because he knew the machinery so well. So pivoting jobs can be a really good way of retaining older workers. Offering time and place flexibility. Obviously, the pandemic taught us that we can do this. Mentoring programs, and then alumni engagement. This is something that is really important to remember. When your older workers or even your mid-career or early workers leave, if you have a way of staying in touch with them, if you have a way of bringing them back for company celebrations and highlighting their successes, that's a way to not only signal to your older workers or the folks who are leaving you value them and their contributions, but it shows your younger workers that, again, there's a place here for them, that they can stay, they could even come back even. So alumni engagement is a great way to provide that flexible retention. Lastly, I just want to talk about a couple of AARP resources. So one of the best practices that we cover in the report is making a public declaration. And this is the AARP Employer Pledge, which is the program that I run, is a way to do that. It's a pledge that states that you value older workers and are committed to building age-diverse organizations. And it's a pretty easy thing to commit to, right? It's just, you know, an easy lift. And lastly, I'll just point out a couple of resources that we have. You can find them all at these different URLs, but probably the best one is aarp.org/employers. We have great stuff provided by my colleague on supporting the caregivers in your workforce, so strategies for how to do that. We've got the business case for workers 50 plus. We've got an age inclusion checklist, which we just launched a couple months ago. So a lot of great things here for you. And of course, we do have our manufacturing report, multi-generational teams report, which we just launched.
Thank you so much, Heather. I hope you all can take a moment to look at the report that we just released. I think it's got some great insights into it. Next up, we have a focus session as a follow-up to the preview in the email, The Road Up. So before we get started, I want to first share just the trailer before we welcome our panelists.
It's like, please check your firearms at this point.
Does it say that really?
I always cared at least a little bit about everything. And something just snapped in my head and I didn't give a shit about anything.
I'm interested in the customer service position.
Yeah, I made a mistake, but it's not gonna happen again. Maybe something else might happen, but not that one.
I need some work experience, so I'm willing to do just about anything, not too degrading, but I do something to get me back into the workforce.
Good morning. Good morning. What's the latest and the greatest?
I would never think to try a job training program. I know how to work.
Say I don't want to go. Say you don't want to go. Say you don't want to go. Say you don't want to go. Sit your ass down.
If you don't come here because you truly want to change your life, it's not going to work.
I am worthy of the best that life has to offer. I don't care how many mistakes I made.
It's hard. It's hard as hell. But if we know that, who in the hell want to do it by their damn self?
Anything that is worth obtaining takes hard work, and this is the work. I mean, I feel good about today. So, I don't know.
All we're doing is selling hope. I can't get you to the next step if I cannot feed that little glimmer of hope that got you to get up out the bed in the first place. Without hope, there's nothing.
Lift me up, lift me up, lift me up, lift me up.
Put your head back and say it again. I am worthy of the best that life has to offer.
I know you love me.
So, as I hope you've seen, the Road Up follows 4 participants in CARA in a Chicago job training program as they are searching for stable employment and a pathway out of poverty. In each case, they took their experience, often learned from the hardships of daily life, and they applied it to finding and keeping, keyword, a job. So today, we are excited to be joined by Greg Jacobs, co-director of the Road Up, and Sarah Wassertel, the managing director of expansion and integration at the CARA Collective, to discuss the film and the steps manufacturers can take to increase employee life cycle. So Greg and Sarah, if you'll join me.
Thank you.
Thank you both for being here, and thank you for the amazing work that you are both doing. I think we would all say the documentary is inspiring, but the work that you're doing at CARA is amazing and so important to what we are doing. I wanted to ask, on the surface, the Road Up is about the participants in this job training program, right? But if somebody's going to say, what is the movie really about? What would your answer be? How would it be different if I wouldn't say a job training program?
We started this around 2014, and I think we finally got an answer to that around 2020 when we finished it. We actually had a list on our whiteboard at one point of something like 20 or 25 things that it could possibly be about. Issues that we thought, this is what the movie's really about. Is it about homelessness? Is it about incarceration, addiction? poverty, segregation, all the things that kind of go into it, all the issues or causes that brought the people to Kara in the first place. And I think it was only when we had essentially finished the film that we kind of hit on an explanation. And to us, the film is really about the barriers that millions of Americans face, whether they're small or large, whether they're internal or external, whether they're individual or systemic, that prevent them from getting and keeping a job. And it's like, suddenly, like once we figured that out, it all became very clear. Like that's what the movie's about, because that encompasses so many of the other issues that the film speaks to. And one of the things that I think coming up with that answer allowed us to do was then figure out how the film can be used. So it's sort of, what is the movie about? And then what can it do? And I think one of the things that's so exciting about this and why it's such an honor and thrill for us to be here is that we are trying to put the film to use as a tool for organizations and companies to have these conversations about these issues that are often very challenging and divisive and not always intuitive to people. And the film can provide a space that sort of softens the discussion a little bit and maybe fills in a little bit more of the why and some of the things that you've been talking about this morning and this afternoon. And then the wonderful thing is we're working very closely with Kara and they can fill in the how, and it works really nicely.
So that's one of the things that I pulled out of it is when we talk about diversity and inclusion, diversity makes a lot of logical sense. It's numbers, it's people, it's individuals. The inclusion piece gets a little bit trickier, right? That is bringing your whole self to work. And that's one of the things I really appreciated about this film is it showed their whole selves and some of the challenges that they were facing. One of the things that Jesse said is, this isn't about a job. And so I want to pull on that thread a little bit because he basically says a job is necessary, but not sufficient in what they're doing and what the people that are coming to Kara are through. So pulling on that a little bit, if it's not about a job, what is it about?
Well, so I think Jesse sees the people who come into Kara are often at a certain low point in a vicious cycle. And in many cases, the job was an intensifier of that cycle or something that accelerated the cycle, but it may have been the cause of it, but maybe not. It could have been, as in Jesse's case, a broken relationship. It could have been addiction. It could have been, in Clarence's case, incarceration. It could have been any of a number of things. So the job is kind of part of that cycle, but it's not the whole thing. So to expect the job to then put you into a virtuous cycle and be solely responsible for everything turning out okay is kind of crazy. And that's what Jesse will say all the time. You can't expect a Tamala who has spent 25 years not having a job to suddenly get a job, know how to do the checkbook, know how to do all the sort of rudiments of getting to work every day and the culture of work and all of that. That's just not going to happen. So I think for Kara and for what Jesse is doing in Transformations, a lot of it is about all the other elements that will accelerate the virtuous cycle in addition to the job. So it's understanding the culture of work. It's deepening your bench, as Kara often likes to say, so that you have family or community or connection so that when things don't go so well, the virtuous cycle can continue. So I think in that sense, the job is necessary. It's necessary for self-confidence and well-being and financial stability and all of that. But there's so much else that goes into then what you need to do to keep that job. That's the sort of package that Kara is trying to push through all the time.
So the film is for individuals, right? It's 4 faces that we're following throughout. But to the point, there are millions of people, right? The barriers that you're just discussing, there are a million people who are locked out of the workforce due to a variety of barriers. So Sarah, can you talk a little bit about what steps can the manufacturers take in an employee's life cycle to overcome those barriers, to find those overlooked talent?
Absolutely. So as Greg just talked about, at Kara, we're focusing so much on the whole person. And so we think a lot about empathy. My team comes at it from a little bit more of a scientific approach because we thought we've moved people into roughly 12,000 jobs at 70% same firm retention rates. what's actually happening? What can employers do to access that talent? And when we looked at that through a scientific lens, we identified 5 different levers that employers can pull, not just to access that talent, but retain and grow them. So number 1, that's on the sourcing piece. So how do you not just find that talent, but create the opportunities? That includes the requirements you have, the language that you use, and where you source. Second, we look at the hiring process. So the selection process for everything from reducing bias in the hiring process all the way to skills-based hiring. Third, we look at job quality, support, and culture, because we also know that getting someone in the job is just the first step. If you can't keep them, it doesn't really matter. We know that there's been a lot of talk about wages and benefits right now, but there's also other things, as you all know so well, which is, what does the support look like from the manager? What is the culture? And what are the opportunities for support, especially for people who might come from experiences where they've had trauma? Fourth, we look at upward mobility. So career pathing and upskilling is a hot topic right now, but if people don't know about the career pathing and actually have a pathway to get there, it doesn't really matter. So we think a lot about advancement. And then lastly, we think about public positioning. I suspect that many of you here have someone in your company who thinks a lot about risk and says, we can't hire this population or that population because it's just too risky. And so we talk about public positioning because the best way to reduce risk is to hear about other companies that are doing it. And so we always encourage companies that if you're shifting practices and you're seeing success there, shout it from the rooftops, because that's going to be the way that you can get other employers to follow suit and increase those opportunities for others in your community as well.
I love that. And it's one of the things that I think we talk about all the time is, I love that that's number 5. So that we have steps 1 through 4 are the tangible actions that we should be employing. And then, by the way, tell everybody else what you're doing. I do love that. Okay, so race is not mentioned really in the film at all, I don't think. But there's this constant intersection of race, poverty, homelessness, all of this kind of tied together throughout the film. And in fact, right, 80% of CARA participants are people of color.
90%.
90%, I was off. So what are the structural and the historical, what are the barriers that they're facing that we can try to overcome and implement?
Yeah, and I mean, I think even more specifically, I think 80% of the CARA participants are Black. I think that may be the number. So Chicago, like so many other cities, has a history of segregation that goes back, generations, hundreds of years, 150 years at least. And so what I think the population that CARA gets kind of reflects is, first these, many decades of explicitly racist social policies, real estate restrictive covenants, banking redlining, restrictions and constraints in the way federal money was being spent, all of that, that essentially precluded wealth creation and intergenerational wealth creation, and also opportunity. So, and created in Chicago a very, very segregated city. There was a point, in the 50s or 60s or 70s where there may have been, when some of those barriers started to fall, but then other supports were kicked out from beneath people in other ways. So, the jobs being outsourced and jobs moving to the suburbs, or jobs not coming to mostly Black neighborhoods. So I think the result is that in Chicago, you have probably, technically, there may be less segregation now, but the segregation that does exist is probably more hyper-segregation and more hyper-impoverished too. So the poverty is deeper. And that's not everybody who comes to CARA by any means. But I think what you see is, in someone like Clarence's life, is constraints that have been there from birth, that have made it at each level incrementally harder for him to have gotten to the point where he would enter the workforce without, existing significant barriers. And we didn't go into Clarence's specific story, but, it is a story of a small mistake, justice involvement, and then the spiral that goes from there. So I think that's those are the constraints that people are working on. And one of the things that fascinated me about CARA is the way that what Jesse does takes these massive systemic factors into account, but then acknowledges that, racism, segregation, housing discrimination, these things aren't going to be solved by tomorrow morning when you have to get to work. So how do we then deal simultaneously with give the individuals the tools that maybe they haven't been acquired over the years or have lost over time? How do we give them the tools to then start the process of joining the economic mainstream as we're also doing the necessary work to fight these other things? And I think the fact that what he does bridges what is the political divide of the last 60 years was totally fascinating to us. It's such common sense. Like, of course it's systemic, and of course it's individual. But we tend to view things as, if you say one way, you're blaming the victim. If you say it the other way, you're excusing personal responsibility or whatever. So to me, it was like there's a solution somewhere in Jesse and in the role that he plays, and that was really interesting.
That I like how you tied that to those two divides of political ties. The other thing I would note that you just were talking about is, I think in our world, that division between equality and equity.
Mm-hmm.
So, you talk about Clarence's history of, at birth, there were barriers that were placed there. And that's the equitable outcome that we're trying to shift for all and be more inclusive.
Right. And it is not always intuitive to some people, to understand the extra burden and the extra work and the extra pushing that needs to happen in order to bring people to a point of parity of opportunity. And that can be a hard sell, but it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah. So Sarah, how is Kara helping to shift perspectives, is what I'll say, shift perspectives and encourage employers to deepen their DEI strategies?
Yeah, so if I think about some of the comments that Greg just made around structural inequalities, we oftentimes take a very data-oriented approach. So if we think about justice involvement in particular, if you are Black in America, you are 6 times more likely of being incarcerated than if you are white. Or if you're Latinx, 3 times more likely. When you think about how much of the population is then excluded from the workforce, it shifts the conversation with employers of what is the talent that we are missing out on. So what we do with employers is, first, we do a few different things. So number one, we work with DEI professionals, executives, and HR professionals to take a really deep dive into their practices. Sometimes it starts with a narrative shift, which oftentimes we'll lead with this film because that's what it will do. But then what we can do is we work with them to showcase other employers that have done the work. We use tactical practices that our job seekers have shown us of, here are the things that we've continued to bump into along the way. And then we work with them to build pilots so that they can shift practices in their firms. I think about a manufacturing firm we worked with recently who was constrained, as our friend talked about earlier, with government contracts and with client contracts. So they said, we don't think we can do anything. We worked with them on what they could do, and they're now hiring 100 more people a year because of slight shifts they could make to their entry requirements. So oftentimes you're working with people who are curious about it, and they have the will, but they don't have the way. And so we can use those job seeker informed practices and employer practices to kind of move the needle just, bit by bit, employer by employer.
I think what's interesting there is, right, justice involved, right? By shifting slightly to become more inclusive to justice involved, the impacts that you're having across the entire workforce, that as you become more inclusive to any population, you're becoming more inclusive to all, and the positive benefits that you have from that.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Kristen, it is Kristen. I'm terrible at names, but it's Kristen and her mom are discussing the challenges that the Black community face, right, in the film. Is that correct? Okay. And they're sitting in her kitchen, the mom's kitchen, they're talking about this, and there's clearly a generational divide. There's that age issue that's popping up. So Kristen kind of says like, oh, well, this is systemic and it's all systemic. And her mom is talking about, no, you have to focus on education and family. And we gave you all these opportunities. And you can see the common everyday conversations that are happening across kitchens across America. But who do you agree with? How do we, I mean, we talked earlier about this. There is no right, there is no wrong. They're both, we have to deal with the system, but we have to deal with the individual. How do you come to an answer in those really everyday kind of conversations?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the answer is yes. I mean, they're both right. And it is fascinating because Kristen's mom comes from an era where there was this, I think, sense of possibility and hope. That integration was going to break down barriers, that education was the way out. And that is, you know, still suffuses communities. And then Kristen comes from a generation where it's like, no, you're crazy. We're just spinning our wheels. Education is just going to put you in debt, and it's not going to get you the kind of work that you need anyway. We're being incarcerated. We're being persecuted. And you're naive and crazy to think that these sort of hopeful, wishful things will happen. And what she sees in her world, that is an absolutely accurate reflection. And, you know, there has to be an acknowledgement that both are valid and both are accurate in their way. And I also think one of the things that I love about that conversation is that it reminds people that there is, you know, I always have an issue when people talk about the X community, the Black community, whatever, the Hispanic community, because it's really, really, really hard to define a single community there. There are Black communities, there are Latino communities, but there are differences within them that have always been there and will continue to be there. And so I think, you know, it's a way to sort of remind people that there are common experiences that you have to take into account when you're talking about a population, for example, a demographic, but then that it's always individual and that there are always subgroups within that will think differently, and to sort of that the broad brush, chances are, is going to be a nice tool for the beginning, but once you start to get into the weeds, that was a terrible mixed metaphor. It's not going to help that much. And so that's why, you know, in a sense, we wanted that conversation there because we wanted a conversation that was explicitly about race in the film somewhere, but we also wanted it to represent a multitude of, you know, two different perspectives to remind people that there's no one way that, you know, Black people or, you know, Latinx people or whatever are going to think about any particular issue. And I think that's crucial. I would imagine that's crucial for the work that everybody in here does, that everyone is an individual.
So I think that's right. There's this precipice of the systemic issues: housing, racism, segregation, addiction. But then there's the individual. And I think that was what you really highlighted in the film, is the job interview, the dealing with a manager, all of those individual skills that, Kara, I know you guys are working on. I think we call them soft skills, but they're the harder skills. And I think that was said right. Even though they're the soft skills, are more difficult to attain. So when you talk about skills-based hiring, skills-based promotion, skills-based period, can you explain a little bit more about how should employers be implementing skills-based?
Absolutely. I think you hit it on the head. When we think back to the characters in the film, you look at someone like Tamala, who has, you know, she's been homeless, she hasn't had a job, and so she might wonder, who's going to hire me? But we also see the skills that she brings. And it reminds me of one of our participants, Tamika, who was a mother of 5. She was a young mother of 5, and so she had never been in the workforce before, but of course she got 5 kids to school on time with lunch every day. She cleaned her house very well. And yet she still couldn't get a job. And so when she came to Kara, we worked with her and said, okay, well, let's put this on your resume. Now it's the Johnson household. And she got to actually itemize all of the things she was responsible for to get a job, first in housekeeping at a property management firm, but now she's a manager there, because we all know that if you are a single mother of 5, you are a natural leader. And so I bring that up because our hiring processes right now are so focused on, well, what was your previous work history? It's focused on the resume, the work background, when really there are so many different transferable skills that someone can bring to a job to be incredibly successful. So when we focus on that hiring lever, that second one we talked about, we think about how can you actually assess someone for the skills that they have and the potential that they bring, regardless of whether they've worked in a factory, regardless of what they've done, because there's so many different ways to acquire skills. And we are not taught as a society to look at it in that way. And so there's a great article, look it up. It's called Imagine a Hiring Process Without Resumes. It was in the Harvard Business Review. And it's this amazing model that's been pioneered in New York. They don't look at resumes at all. You put your name on a list, and once your name goes on the list, or gets called from the list rather, they call you in, you're hired, no resume, no job, but they invest in your training. Their retention rates are 80+%. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what experience you've had, but because they invest in training instead of in recruitment, they're able to invest in the individual. And it brings not just the company success, but the individual success as well.
I'm going to look that up. That is amazing. I've never heard of it. That's amazing. I think that is one of, and you're echoing things that we've heard throughout the day, right? When we talked about military, we talked about getting rid of some of the typical language that we've had and focusing on skills based. But I love the idea of no resumes. That's fairly revolutionary. The other aspect of that is the inclusion piece. And I do want to pull this back to, he does the love exercise, right? Jesse does the love exercise. And it was something that I walked into the film thinking, okay, this is about job training. And then he's doing a love exercise and the mirror exercise and all these things of standing up and saying, I'm worthy. How do we fit that into our job cultures? How do we, why did you include that in this film as part of a job training program? But then B is, how do we fit that into our workplaces as well?
Yeah, I when I think of the love exercise, I sort of break into a panic sweat because I think I don't know how I would do that. So the fact that they all have to do that is just mind-boggling to me. When Jesse talks about the process of transformation, so for people who didn't get a chance to watch the film, Transformations is this kind of boot camp that all the participants in Carat have to go through for the first month, and it's 4 weeks. And there is a very strategic process that it takes people through. And so part of it, the first week, is to get people, as Jesse likes to say, to feel again. Because they're folks, for a lot of whom, feeling things like trust, basic human emotions, have been shut down, or they can be dangerous even in the lives that they've been living. So for week 1, he gets them to feel again. But then he says, once you start to those nerve endings start to come out and you don't know what to do with them, that can be a really dangerous place. So then the processes go, how do you sort of start to control those things? How do you work on impulse control and the harder skills? And then finally, how do you sort of do away with some of the baggage that you've been carrying around this whole time? And I think the idea fundamentally is that a lot of the people will come in saying, I'm in a job training program, just get me the job. Don't put me through this program. I've been through so many programs, just give me a job. And he knows that that's not going to work. So he is trying to do in a month what, parents spend 20 years trying to get their kids to do, or more. And he gets people only so far, but at least he gets them a start, and then Carat kind of provides sort of the hallway that they can perform within over the next year. But I think to talk about love and to have that as such a crucial ingredient in the thing is really about the importance of connection, for one thing, and the importance of vulnerability. Another skill or trait that is often dangerous for the participants or unheard of. And to realize that you need to make yourself vulnerable, you need to put yourself out there, and that someone will reciprocate positively is such a crucial lesson, and so essential to any workplace success, that kind of feedback, that I think that's what makes that lesson both so powerful and so essential to what Jesse's doing.
All I kept thinking about, how many of you have done the Gallup survey where it's like, do you have a best friend at work? That's just what I kept thinking about the entire time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sarah, please.
So I've done the love exercise. It was the scariest thing I've ever had to do in my career, is going through the love exercise with Jesse. But when I think about the love exercise, and I think about, as you called it, the harder skills, talking about love, talking about forgiveness, and I think about how we translate that to the workplace, it's that word that Greg just used, which was connection. So often people leave their jobs because they don't feel supported. No one says, how are you? Or if you're showing up late to work, is it because you don't have a jacket? And so when we think about the love exercise and we think about the vulnerability and the connection and we think about how that translates, I oftentimes think about how that translates to managers and how you might come to someone with a sense of curiosity versus a sense of concern. Because so often, especially with individuals that we serve, they come in because they don't believe in themselves. They don't believe in themselves because they've been incarcerated. They don't believe in themselves because maybe they've been in and out of homelessness, or maybe because their community hasn't told them that they believe in them too. They say, nah, you can't do that. You're never going to be successful. And so when we think about how that translates to a workplace, so often you need someone to believe in you before you can believe in yourself. And so that's what the love exercise does. And that's what we also help to do with employers, to think about, as we think about that manager and we think about that point of connection, how much better would retention be if someone just said, how are you, every single day? What do you need? How would that shift the dynamic? Because that if you know someone cares about you, you're a heck of a lot more likely to show up and you're a heck of a lot more likely to ask questions and stay.
Yeah, I have to add something that Cara also does. And Cara is the Gaelic word for friend. So that's a crucial part of the ethos of the place. But there's something also terrifying that they do every day, which is called motivations. And it's the sort of morning ritual, and we don't show it in the film really, but the chairs are sort of set in concentric circles, and there's a theme, and people get up and they talk about something deeply personal that's related to that theme, something, that puts them out there and is vulnerable in front of the whole community. And then the terrifying part, they have to sing. So you start a song. And the incredible thing is it's like a musical trust fall. You start a song and then the whole community comes in and starts singing along with you. And it is, anybody who goes to Cara will tell you that will sell them on it in the first 20 minutes because it's so powerful and so emotional. But you also spend the entire half hour going, oh God, Stevie Wonder song. No, Earth, Wind, and Fire. What am I going to sing? Because it is like, it's a terrifying thought to step out and sing in front of a crowd, but then to watch people kind of swoop in and they got you. It's an incredible metaphor, and it's also just incredibly emotional to watch.
Do you want to know why we do it?
Yes.
Because this is also one of those things, people come for a job training program, they're like, I'm sorry, what you want? No, I'm not singing. And they do sing. And here's why we do it. Because we all know that the number one fear in America is what? It's not spiders, it's public speaking. But I think it's because they didn't realize that the actual number one fear is singing, right? And so if we get people to speak publicly about something vulnerable, they might go from saying, I can't, to like, okay, maybe I can. And if you do that with singing where they're like, heck no, then maybe they can continue to overcome those mental barriers of like, yeah, maybe I could apply for this job, or maybe I could do something I never thought I could do. So it doesn't sound like it's applicable to a job, but it's probably one of the most applicable things we do for the job seeker.
I really do love that the aspects that you focus on, I mean, obviously the technical skills, but that you focus on all of those skills that are so difficult to ascertain from a book. Okay, so my last question, then I'll open it up, is COVID-19. So you finished the film just prior to the pandemic, I believe?
Basically, yeah. I mean, it was essentially done, and then we really finished it about 6 months in, but just tweaks.
Okay, so in our industry, we went from about 450,000 open jobs in manufacturing across the nation to now we're at about 900,000 open jobs. And we're seeing this across the country where we have just skill shortage or talent shortages everywhere. Do you think that the challenges the film that highlights is more urgent, less urgent? How are we impacting when everyone just needs workers now?
For me, at least, from our perspective, the combination of the pandemic and the disparities that it shone a spotlight on, and also the summer of Black Lives Matter protests and the post-George Floyd murder protests, all of that really changed the filter that people saw the film through. So I think in 2019, when unemployment was 4%, and for a lot of people, the issues of race, place, and poverty weren't front and center, even though we were trying to say this is really urgent, it was a harder sell. I think what has happened is that has completely, put this scrim in front of the film now, where a movie about unemployment, racial equity, and poverty, like that's about as 2020, 2021 as it gets. And what has been interesting is it's opened up these opportunities, especially for corporate possibilities, where there are conversations, the interests that we've had have been from companies that now feel an urgency that some of them are already feeling, but some of them feel much more acutely. And some of them weren't feeling at all before this, that a way to start talking about these issues. And it may be that there are executive level people who are all behind it, but maybe the plant managers are not, or the people on the line are not. So how do you maybe provide accelerant or energy behind policies that the top level wants to implement, but maybe the bottom isn't sold yet? So that has been a really, really fascinating change, that the whole way people see the relevancy of the film kind of flipped on its head in the last year.
Anything to add from your?
I think it brings a huge opportunity. If we think about who COVID hit the hardest, it is the people who already had barriers to employment. Homelessness went up, food insecurity went up, and people who might have wanted to work couldn't work because they had to care for younger or older family members. So on the talent supply side, you have people who want to and want to work, but have been prevented from it. And then on the other side, you see a talent supply or a talent shortage. And then we've also seen this much overdue awakening around the murder of George Floyd. And so companies are now more activated and they are being more flexible in their policies. So I see right now as a huge opportunity because there's more resources going to it. And I think companies are finally realizing that they need to shift policies that they didn't think they could shift in the past because they have a business need for it. Because there is a talent shortage right now.
Well, thank you both. Truly, thank you for being here. Thank you for the work that you're doing and for sharing your stories with us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. And as our last official session, we are going to be joined by Carolyn Lee and two executives to hear their views on efforts to increase diversity and inclusion at their companies. So please welcome Carolyn Lee.
I'm so pleased to be joined. Hello. So I'm so pleased to be joined up here to talk about Voices from Leadership on D&I, and to be joined by Patricia Rossman, Chief Diversity Officer and HR Communications for BASF, and Barbara Hunt, a jumped in last minute addition, which we are so appreciated. We so appreciate Vice President Human Resources, Janssen Supply Chain, Johnson & Johnson. And it is wonderful to have you both here today with us. And I will note that Nicole Walter from H&M Manufacturing was on the agenda, as we wanted to make sure we had a large and a small, but Nicole had a personal emergency come up, so wasn't able to travel in here. So we are so happy, Barbara, you jumped into the gap to share your thoughts with us. So both big companies, both company names we know, but if you both could introduce yourself. Pat, we'll start with you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then of course BASF.
Great, thank you. So a true pleasure to be here with everyone. I'm Pat Rossman, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for BASF. BASF is a major manufacturer, like so many of the good companies that are part of this forum here today. One of the world's leading chemical manufacturers. We talk about BASF in terms of we create chemistry. So really moving into, the chemistry of life, the chemistry with people. We have been on the diversity and inclusion journey for some time now, but I think have learned some interesting lessons of late and very much would look forward to discussing some of those.
Excellent. Thank you, Pat and Barbara.
Yes, hi. Barbara Hunt. You already mentioned I lead Janssen, the global pharmaceutical supply chain for Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson's one of the largest healthcare companies in the world, global. We have med device, pharmaceuticals, and consumer health products. And yeah, looking forward to talking about our journey like you. We've been on for a while and looking forward to discussing.
You know, the longer you've been on it, the more you realize there is to do, but that's not a bad thing, right? It means we're making progress. I guess it's kind of like we're tunneling to the core of the earth here. There's always more. Yeah. Okay, so when you each talk about diversity and inclusion in the workplace, what does that mean? Like if you have to give the elevator speech in your company, what does that mean to your company? Barbara?
Okay. Honestly, what it means, it's about culture and leadership. So it isn't a program, right? It is about what we expect our leaders, how we expect everybody. When I say leaders, it can be individual contributor all the way up to senior leaders. We have a very explicit of what that means around inclusion, around listening to other voices. And then from a culture perspective, you know, we believe that that we need to respect people's diversity and their dignity. We need to people need to feel that they belong, that their voices are heard. And we have a credo at J&J that we hold very sacred and don't make changes to that very often. And recently, about a year ago, made a change to explicitly call in inclusion and diversity, because we felt like, well, it's part of our culture, but we needed to be explicit. Yeah. And so it's not an opt-in. When you join Johnson & Johnson, you are signing up, you know, for to believe and advocate for diversity and inclusion.
You know, it's just such a great point. I know when we started our work, when AJ first began this back in, we started talking to our board about it in 2018, they said, we don't want a program. We don't want just this thing over here that lives separate. Check the box, you're doing your program. We want it infused in. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, what's really come to light for many manufacturers in this last year with such an intense societal focus on equity and inclusion has been the idea that this isn't just something you do. It's not like, okay, you have to do your compliance test, you know, once a year and make sure you've done all those workplace compliance things. But this really is about your culture. And it is something about, it's so key to retention. So Pat, what does it mean to BASF?
I would say that I would say that my answer and the answer of people in BASF has deepened over the past couple of years. I think originally I would have answered that question with, it's all about profitability. It's about success. It's the only way that we as a major manufacturer of, you know, chemical products that are fundamental to the way people live their lives. It's the only way we can anticipate and meet market needs. And all of that remains very true. But I think what the past 2 years have taught us is that there's also this dimension of belonging. So, you know, we started more, as I'm sure many of us have, right? We started more focused on diversity. From that, we have layered in a really deep commitment to inclusion in the same way, right? It's who we are. You need to embrace this to be part of BASF. But now we've been moving even more toward, how does that influence belonging? And then what's the productivity gain that you get with that? But even at that, I would say that in the manufacturing sector, really looking at this concept of equity in very different ways. I think the killing of George Floyd, the COVID pandemic, and the disparate impacts that has had, it really has us focusing on issues around equity. And when I look at things like the Edelman Trust Index, you see such interesting change there that people are looking, as our society and our world becomes more divided and maybe more divisive, people looking to their companies more for, you know, setting the environment, setting the culture. So that's where my answer is different. BASF's answer is different. And I liked where you were going there. It's almost like when you let that light in, you see even more of the cracks in the foundation, but you also see what you have to address.
Yeah, it's funny when we first saw that result in the benchmark, we kind of did is this bad news? And no, I think it's good news, because it's going to how deep companies are looking at this, and then the lens it's no longer, I feel like, I remember when we did this last year, our first diversity inclusion summit, the discussion was, okay, diversity is a counting exercise, inclusion is a how does everybody feel exercise. And the more you do, the more you realize, but the more opportunity that comes from doing that, truly. And it is an opportunity, which goes to, our next question. Both of you are HR professionals. Both of you also work in D&I. There's an intersection there. It is often entwined, but also you have operational leaders, I'm sure, who do work on D&I across your facilities as well. How does that vary? Like, how does that kind of the operational piece of that work? And then are there best practices that you found to make this an integral part of the business, both from the HR lens, but also from the business lens? Sorry, it's a long question. Barbara, you can start.
Yeah, no, long question. No, but it's a good one. I mean, again, DEI is complex. I'm not telling you anything we don't know. And it requires both. It's an and, right? And so we have our Office of DEI that focuses on the things that we can move across 154,000 employees. Do you know, like a conscious inclusion program or an unconscious bias program? Or we have a survey every year, an inclusion index. So we rely on our Office of DEI to really think about it from an enterprise perspective. And then we have, 140 HR leaders in supply chain globally that are focused on driving representation, on driving the right discussions, the storytelling, helping our people leaders understand every day, honestly, why diversity matters. And, it's so easy to assume, people are resistant, people leaders are resistant. It's harder to say, no, you know what? Actually, they aren't resistant. It's just hard. It's complicated. It's about representation. Numbers matter, but they don't matter because it's bigger. It's a bigger play. But we do track, and to be able to hold those dual things, that's what we rely on our HR. Sure. I wonder how it is similar.
And we're going to talk more about metrics and goals in a moment. So we'll come back to that for some more, Pat.
No, and I love to pick up on that theme, right, of how do we operationalize some of this. And I think, here in a forum about manufacturing, the site leader, the role of the site leader is it's so complex. It always has been, but even more so now. They really stand every day at the crossroads of all of this. So how do we support our site leaders in really being the front lines of driving culture? And we've had an initiative we've been working on for about the past 2 years, year and a half, called Getting the Basics Right. And it's one of those that I say with a smile, it's a bit of a misnomer because these things aren't basic, but it's really, equally accessible restrooms for men and women. It's gender neutral restrooms. It's mother's rooms. It's quiet rooms. It's uniforms in female sizes. It's all of those things that send a signal. We've thought about you. We care about you. We need you here with us. So we've been working on all of these things around, getting the basics right. But we have a site leader network, and that site leader network comes together very often. We started talking about plumbing. We're talking all about culture. We're talking about, you send those signals, but how do you deepen those connections? So I think in the operationalizing of things, one of the things that we did, because you asked about, what was a best practice that we tried, there was always that sense that there's not diverse talent in some of the communities where our manufacturing sites are based. And we knew that wasn't true. We knew it was that, perhaps the talent wasn't as attracted to us. Perhaps we did not recognize great talent when we saw it. And so what we were saying is, how do you then hardwire a different approach? So we set up our Talent and Diversity Challenge a number of years ago that said that 50% of the people we interview for all of our jobs need to represent some of the diversity that we seek in the market. And that made a big difference. But I think what made the bigger difference was that 50% of the people doing the interviewing also need to reflect the diversity we seek in the marketplace. And we found that different questions were asked. We found that the answers were questioned in different ways. So that was something that proved to be a circuit breaker, because I really don't think that overnight the talent was there. I think all of a sudden we were seeing that we were interviewing and we were connecting in different ways.
Yeah. It's like now that you're aware of it, you've seen it more, and then seeing more opportunities, but that deliberate step of this is the structural changes we're going to make and institute, so that then it allows, it's that step, which goes to a fascinating question. Now, both of you are huge companies, and I can't remember how many countries each of you have operations in, each of your companies do, but how do you do it at scale? Right. And at the same time, how do you train to prepare your site leaders to be able to help when you're in so many different places? So let's talk about scale, but then also diversity looks different all over the world, and that where the gaps are different all over the world, of course. So then you can, hone in on the US and how you do that at scale here.
So maybe I'll start on that one. I think, it's interesting. I think the default sometimes for companies is gender, because you can say, all right, gender issues around the world, but even gender issues are so different, because we operate in parts of the world where talk about an unequal playing field. Women are not welcome in the workforce. There are, restrictions. So even gender, the area where you think, okay, maybe that is a simpler area to focus, even that is very complex. What we're trying to focus on is the dimension of difference. So no matter where you are in the world, what's the population that's different? What's the group that has a harder time fitting in? And I noticed earlier this morning, particularly with our colleagues from AARP, they were citing data from the World Economic Forum. And we've done a lot of looking into that as well, because they've set this threshold of 30%, that even if you're a microbiologist on a team of chemists, or however your difference is, 30% composition, you start to feel less like an outlier. You start to feel like, oh, I don't have to rehearse what I'm going to say 5 times in my head before I say it. And so, what we're really looking to do is look at that dimension of difference, and then around the world, who's different that we need to draw into our circle.
I like that.
And that's different no matter, where you sit. It's different here in the United States.
Yeah.
Right. Barbara?
Yeah, we don't do that. I like that. I'm writing that down. But certainly, again, I mentioned the Office of DEI from an enterprise. We have DEI leaders in each region. There are things that we look at in the, EMEA region or in Asia Pacific, or in different parts of the world. LGBTQ is handled very differently in some parts of the world where it's illegal versus, in Canada, So we're very mindful of that. And then going back to the site leaders, for instance. So we certainly have a triage of different things. I think it is, there isn't one formula, right? There is judgment that has to be applied, and there are, hits and misses, and but I think it's about how do we progress this?
Right.
We say a lot at J&J that we're pleased but not satisfied. We want to be proud of the work we've done and the commitment we have, but we know there's always more, and so that's always what we're looking at and thinking about. So I'm going to add that to the list.
I like that too. We're going to steal that one also. So we're just all sharing here. Exactly. So talk a little, go next step. Like, how do you balance then the local versus the company-wide goal, right? That you have a company position. I know you have your annual report. You guys have a similar annual global statement. How do you balance, and then be able to track and measure? Do you just do it by region and have that be the goal? The US, this is the goal for the US. Or is it more, that you want to be talking about apples all across the board, right? So you're able to compare. How do you balance that?
Yeah, we, technology and we have something called workforce DNA. So the statistics and metrics are key to this. And, it's really, the levers are an ecosystem, right? We have enterprise policies, we have regional initiatives, we have site initiatives, but we have people leaders who have goals connected to, if they're, they have to be have a certain group because they have to be able to influence a certain size. But every individual leader, no matter where they sit in the world, do have goals, and it's about progress. It's about whatever your baseline is, doing better. So it's about incremental improvement. We also have slate and interview panel diverse requirements, and it's putting those things in place that help move that.
Yeah, that does. That's very helpful, because it's a how do you count? Where do you begin, Pat?
Yeah. And I would say a very similar answer, with maybe a lesson learned for us, again, in the past year or so. So very similar, right? We have aspirational goals globally for gender diversity. And then in terms of in the regions, more region-specific goals for what reflects the diversity of the talent pool in those local areas. So if I speak for North America, a lesson learned, we had focused in recent years on selection, because our goal, as everybody listening here would feel the same, is, if we really look at the diversification of our workforce, obviously then over a quick amount of time, given the workplace diversity in North America, we would have a very diverse and inclusive society at BASF. What we have done this year is announced a change in those aspirational goals to focus on composition, because composition is the intersection between who you attract and select and who thrives, who do you develop and retain. So we're really in North America now looking very specifically at composition. With the talent volatility in the market right now in this part of the world, really placing even greater emphasis on retention. And so that's where composition comes in. That's unique to North America, and it's unique to the powerful demographics we have in this part of the world. I think we would all say, arguably, it's the most diverse talent market in the world. So how are we reflecting that?
When we were working with the NAM board on the Pledge for Action, we were very deliberate about what was the goal we were trying to articulate. And we came up with the idea of pathways to opportunity. And for people who don't do workforce all the time, they all said to us, well, what do you mean by that? And we really didn't want to pick one thing. We didn't want to pick just new hires or board, right? There's a whole lot in between. And so what we heard for some of the companies, and I think this is really instructive, right? This goes to the actions. There's so many activities for us to undertake. We heard from some of the companies, they're really diverse in their hourly. They're really diverse in their main production floor. But as you go up to the supervisory ranks, to the salary ranks, that's where things start getting less diverse. So focusing simply on the new hire, although we have 900,000 open jobs, so we have to look at that too, of course. But we can't because it's how do we elevate, and how do we build that composition of the workforce so that people are engaged and they see these careers and these long careers and opportunities, rather than it's one step in the process. And that's been a really challenging discussion, but there's a lot of ways we got to come at this challenge in our sector.
And I think that's where it really gets interesting, right? Is if you dissect this composition then and you say at all levels of leadership, so production supervisors, exactly, right? How do you reflect the diversity in your workforce at the supervisory levels with production, right? And then how is that, for those who want it, a jumping off point? To even further advancement. So if you're not making it happen at the leadership level at all levels, you won't make it happen at the highest level.
That's right. Yeah. Anything to add, Barbara?
No, I mean, we look at every level for that very reason, right? Is that, we were trying to drive the representation, not just at one level, but throughout. Yeah.
It is really something. So now for the how do we overcome some of the challenges? What have been some of the most difficult parts of implementing a D&I program? What lessons are there for others to learn who might be beginning or leaping to that next stage, right? A 2.0 instead of just the 1.0. Barbara.
So I used to play basketball, and in summer league, I remember one time, we had like 20 seconds left, and it was a tie, and our coach called a timeout, and he said, "Okay, go win." And I was like, "That's so unhelpful, That's not helpful in a 20-second timeout. I mean, we want to win, but tell us how to get there."
Do you have any ideas?
And I realized early on, that's just well-intentioned, but a bad strategy, right? And that's what we want to make sure we avoid with diversity. It's easy to say it's important. Now go do it. The hard part is actually creating the opportunities around attraction, retention, promotion, development, all of those, and being aware of what those are, whether it's slates, whether it's interview panels, whether it's development, whether it's sponsorship. It's all of that is going to make a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's the integration of it all.
It absolutely can't be fragmented.
No.
It has to be connected.
Right.
Absolutely. So that, I think, that's an unfair answer maybe, because it's all hard.
No, it's all hard. But do you have to wait then to think it all the way through before you begin? Or can you build the plane as you're jumping out of the, building, that kind of analogy?
I mean, I think it does require some connection, but a rising tide raises all boats.
That's totally true.
Right? So, when you do something well here, it does have an impact, but you can't think only on attraction, as you said, right? You have to think about, it's a short-term strategy if you're thinking only about attraction and not thinking about, well, how do people feel?
Right.
Do they feel like their voices are heard? The inclusion part, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Pat?
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you can't start from any other place than where you are. So I think you just lean into where you are. And then I think it's that you have to just work to be authentic. It's so easy to just kind of look in someone else's mirror and say, I'll take that plan, that effort, that initiative. I think unless you own it, and unless you really own it at a top leader level, you always have a choice, right? We started with a real top leader, authentic focus. Now we're really working at all levels of the organization. But I think there's always a risk, especially right now. I think there's been such a soul searching in corporate America for very valid reasons on, what are we doing to truly change our culture, truly change our companies. And so I think the opportunity to just kind of showcase or window dress is there. I would say start where you are and just really be authentic. And the thing I always, we're our own worst enemies. You have to be patient, but you can't be too patient. Right. And you have to find that balance.
Yeah. So just win. Find that, but it's true. You need to find that balance. So you mentioned one thing, Pat, that I want to pull on the thread a little bit, getting leadership on board. Mm-hmm. And so in your case, it sounded like from what you just said, it was an organic, you had a leader who then, and I know that the similar at J&J, how do you get leaders on board, right? And I think that we're in a little bit different of place maybe this year, last year, than we were 3 years ago on getting leaders on board. I think this has become very ingrained in the national conversation. I don't believe it's a passing fad. That was felt very, very real. I think the George Floyd killing in the wave of the pandemic and so much crisis, I don't know if it made it stick more or so much more vivid because we were living in Technicolor at that moment in time. And it was clearly a breaking point, thank God. But how do we get more leaders on board, and how do you begin that? Like advice to others.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the difference between knowing and doing. I think we have a lot of leaders who are absolutely aligned with diversity and inclusion. It's helping them step through when they have a vacancy. What does that feel like? And when you think about it, when you have an opening, you have pressure to create that, fill that vacancy. If you're really thinking as a 21st century leader, you're thinking about what are the external engagements that I haven't yet reached out to? How do I start building and talent scout now before my vacancy? Right. Those are the types of behaviors that we have to help our leaders continuously build and understand to bridge that gap between knowing and then doing.
And doing. Pat?
And I think there's an interesting paradox at play, right? The term that comes into my mind is very fortunate to be at BASF, a very, very committed senior leadership to diversity and inclusion. But I don't think fortune is a matter of luck. I think it's a part of what the company is really looking to and valuing. But we still see something interesting, like, we do inclusion pulse checks twice a year, right? And in the inclusion pulse check, at more of a middle management level, you see an interesting shift where managers rate themselves as highly inclusive, but then their teams don't always see that. And I think it's human nature, right? I mean, diversity, equity, and inclusion work is so fascinating because it's business and humanity, right in the same problem that you're trying to solve. And I think a colleague of mine has said, and I have quoted her freely now, that we judge ourselves by our intention. Mm-hmm. So we tend to be a little easier on ourselves. Of course, I'm inclusive. My team would see me as inclusive, but others judge us by our actual tangible actions. And so if we're not seeing enough of that, you get that, that dichotomy that we do see, because I think if everybody says, well, I'm highly inclusive, then why do we see pockets where people do not feel included? So there's always more work to do. But we have a very committed senior leadership. And I think they totally understand both the business and the human dimension of it's a fundamental part of being a great place to work. I love being on teams where people are different and you anticipate market needs in different ways and you look through other lenses. That makes it fun.
It makes it fun and so much more interesting, right? Yeah. When everybody is just, thinking the same, saying the same, we can be done with the meeting now, but it's interesting, right? So how do you go about, because one of the biggest challenges here, I think in this space, has been people's ability or comfortability, if that's a word, to be able to come out and say, okay, I want to take this on, right? Are they saying the right things? Are they doing the right things? And there's a lot of concern because people don't want to make things worse. They want to make things better, especially leaders. How do you train your leaders and prepare them for taking this, so they can continue on their journey too? And I'm totally going off the questions we asked because it just occurred to me because it's like we got to keep the training going too.
Yeah. I mean, we spend time having, bringing in professors from different parts of the world to have conversations, to engage in conversations, to talk about race, to talk about gender, to create safe spaces where people can ask questions, to reflect some vulnerability, right? We can have a meaningful dialogue imperfectly, right? And to be able to model that, I think that's important. That's part of understanding that this is it's about our culture. It's not just what we said earlier, a program, right? This is, so we spend time doing that.
I like that. You can have meaningful conversations imperfectly. Mm-hmm. I think that could be my motto.
I love that.
Pat.
And yes, and we have devoted more time toward education, and we have a two-part, and I understand that it is training, but I think it's more education, because to me, education is more long-lasting and more sustainable. But we have focused on a senior leader education program called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is Not a Spectator Sport. Because one of the things that we did see is when you have shared accountability goals, it is easy to say, I'm fine, I don't have to do much more because Barbara has this. Mm-hmm. And so what we're really looking to do is really make this more, individual goals in terms of individual consequential accountability is what we're looking to build, more deeply. But I do think, just how do we all internalize this more and own the outcome? We're really trying to focus more on behavior. Statistics are kind of where you are. It's a bit of the rear view mirror. What you've done so far, that's how you reflect that. But what are we doing? What are the behaviors that will really make a difference? And how do we measure those?
That's excellent. That's very helpful. So now we're talking a little bit about resources. You mentioned professors and bringing in, and I like your point, Pat, so head on. It's not training, it's education, because we're growing, we're learning, we're moving down. We're not just checking the box on the compliance. What are some of the resources you go to keeping up to date on diversity and inclusion? Hopefully the group that AJ has pulled together and the work of the MI is one of them, not to put my finger on the scale. But where else do you go? What are the resources that you would recommend to your colleagues and peers here?
Yeah, go ahead.
I try and absorb as much as I can. I really do. I find some of so I absolutely, and I'm not just saying that because I'm sitting here, it's absolutely true. Manufacturing Institute, right? NAM as well. Absolutely. I am a sponge for all of this information. I look to groups like Diversity Inc. There's a group, Diversity Best Practices. I follow what they're doing. I read, with those groups as well. I also look at the resources of, some of the more think tank kind of groups, the Gartner Group, et cetera, right? So I avail myself of all of that. And in that swirl and in that mix, I try to really talk with people who do similar work that I do, but also people who have no idea about that work, and really just listen. We use our employee resource groups more and more at BASF. It used to be that those groups were a little more extracurricular or volunteer. Since the killing of George Floyd, the groups opened up our eyes to how to go deeper and how to have courageous conversations. And now that we've opened that door, it took us a while to open it. We don't ever want to close it again. So I think sometimes your own people are your best resource for some of this, but there is a multitude of great information out there, and I've probably just done a disservice by naming a handful of them.
Yeah, that's great. There is a lot out there. Barbara, what else would you add?
Yeah, I mean, to add everything that you said, and I honestly, we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. So when you have a DEI lens, you can pick up a McKinsey article, a Gartner article, an HBR article, and always see the implications around inclusion, around diversity. So the resources and the learning is certainly there.
Absolutely. One of the things that we've tried and AJ's worked to build since we began this is there's a lot out there. And the Manufacturing Institute, we are growing, but still small and mighty. And but we don't want to recreate the wheel. That does none of us any good, especially as a nonprofit entity. But how do we put a specific manufacturing lens? And how do we kind of add that additional click to the wheel, right? So that we're really looking at it through manufacturing, because, and this came through in so many ways, particularly during the pandemic. Manufacturers wanted to learn from one another. How are you managing this? Yeah. And I know we're going to have that production conversation because it's at the top of all the lists. Where do you go to tap into, like, what are your best tips for tapping into diverse pools and making sure you're broadening the pools? You talked about it earlier, Pat. Make sure you're reaching into all of those different communities where you operate.
I think our employee resource groups absolutely are key. They are building, inclusion and diversity inside our gates, but they're fundamental to building it outside our gates. And what we started in June of 2020, right after the killing of George Floyd, we embarked on these courageous conversations. And out of that came 6 critical action fields and very rigorous KPIs on how we will be different. And one of them is called Building Community Connection. And it's all about that, right? How do we also, in our corporate philanthropy, our advertising, our employee resource group outreach, how do we touch the communities where our people live and work as well? So I think it's tapping in, and we're at the early stage of this. We need to work more with our manufacturing networks. There are a lot of councils, a lot of safety networks that peer companies come together. We may compete with each other in some ways, but we're so interrelated. We're customers of each other. I think we have a common stake, and how we take that forward and improve things in our communities. For BASF anyway, that's the next step.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Barbara?
No, very, very, very well said. I mean, I think that it is the false conclusion we can sometimes come to is, oh, if I don't have diverse representation in my pool, it must mean there isn't any. And what we've said is, no, that's actually a false conclusion. We haven't been tapping into those pools. So let's take a minute and think about now, not at point of need, and say, well, how are we building those relationships? How are we finding those? And it's different. It's adjacent industries. It's suppliers. There's so many different sources, but it's about being intentional and having a strategy not to react like, we recently had the vaccine mandate. That was a risk. Is that a risk to turnover, higher retention? We have to go run out and find. That's real. You have to do that. But the response from a DEI, you really want it to be a proactive, thoughtful strategy.
When one of our other big bodies of work at the Institute and the National Association of Manufacturers is our Creators Wanted campaign. And we've got to change the perception of manufacturers. Both of your companies have been supporters of the Creators campaign. And one of the things that we know through the work that we've done all these years is that people don't necessarily know we're here. They drive past your enormous facilities and they go, wow, look at that, right? They don't understand there are people who make all of that possible, right? And they see your name and they think, oh, we just know that just magically here. They don't know, though, understand that they could have a role and that their skills and aptitude have a role to play. And we've got to do a better job. And I come from a manufacturing family, and my dad would say, he's retired now, we would just hang a sign and people would come. Well, we are past that now, right? Like we are so far past that. And people just, unless you're already part of manufacturing or someone in your family is in manufacturing, you're not aware of the sector and the opportunities. You think it's really important. You're looking for your stuff when you go to the grocery store. And all the holiday shopping, but you just don't know. And so we've got to tell that story. And so we've got to reach into different communities to tell that story, to then bring them in, and that is really key.
And in ways that appeal to that community, right?
Absolutely.
I smile because sometimes we read some of our job descriptions. Let me use the past tense. We read some of our job descriptions and we thought, my goodness, that they had just dusted that off from many, many years ago. But how do we use terms like problem solving and innately curious? And, I loved when you said adjacent industries. Many of the people we hire are not from the chemical industry. And so how do we have a broader appeal? But this idea of, new talent coming into the workforce, the thought of purpose-driven work, there is such purpose-driven work in manufacturing, but we don't always promote it that way.
No, and that's one of those, going back to your point about working with industry councils and safety councils and all, we're such an amazing industry in that we are truly a rising tide will lift all boats here, right? Everybody is customers of one another. You are suppliers to one another. We are so integrated, right? Yes, you compete, but you have to work together. And the only answer to all the workforce challenge that we have is more people. Like more supply will address all of this because that's the only way forward. And that's where diversity, inclusion, and diversity, equity, inclusion has always been an important business case, but now more than ever, because just the math shows there is no other way, and we have to do it differently, and we have to reach out to people differently. Well, with that, I thank you both so much for your insights and your thoughts and openness. We very much appreciate it. And now I'm going to turn it back to AJ.
Thank you, Carolyn, and what a great conversation to wrap up our second annual D&I Summit. I first want to thank all of our panelists and all of our experts who shared their expertise, their insights, their experience. Your knowledge is really, really valuable as we strive to make our industry and the world a more diverse and equitable place. I want to wrap by offering just a roadmap for the audience on opportunities to engage and deepen your knowledge in 2022. The first is the Pledge for Action. As Carolyn and I mentioned earlier, the NAM Pledge for Action is that by 2025, manufacturers commit to taking 50,000 tangible actions to increase equity and parity for underrepresented communities, creating 300,000 pathways for job opportunities for Black people and people of color, and that by doing so, manufacturing will reflect the diversity of the overall US workforce by 2030. We need manufacturers to take real action. It can be as simple as having a courageous conversation, launching an ERG, or mandating unconscious bias training. In this industry, we make airplanes and vaccines, and together we can also make a brighter future. We're also going to hear directly from manufacturers in our continued D&I Roundtable series, as well as continuing to develop tangible case studies and resources that can be implemented. We, of course, welcome direct feedback, requests on topics, as well as your continued engagement as panelists, sharing best practices that you've implemented at your facilities. And if you've implemented any activities that you heard today, please do share them directly with me at inclusion@nem.org. I am always looking for more ideas. And then I do want to note that I brought this up a little bit earlier, but we are going to launch what we are calling communities of practice. We're going to take the open discussion that we had on the chat and grow and have peer-to-peer conversations that offer engagement both virtually and in person, ideally, on a variety of topics. Our goal is to meet at least quarterly with potential pop-ups for time-sensitive issues to discuss, brainstorm, share ideas and knowledge, and offer resources. If you are interested in joining our community, please do reach out and we will send a follow-up directly via email. So again, taking another moment to thank all of our amazing diversity experts and our manufacturing panelists for sharing their knowledge and experience with us today. Thank you again to our Conic Foundation and Pella for supporting this summit and the work that we do with diversity and inclusion. Today, we have shared countless ways for you and your companies to do more, whether you're the CEO of a Forbes 100 or a small 50-person shop, or a worker just learning to know more about a specific topic. We've offered diversity experts to hopefully partner with, and manufacturers who are sharing their stories and best practices. We hope you can take what you learned today back to your companies and apply it to your workplaces. I'm going to be a little kitschy, but when we were children, we really assumed that we were going to change the world, and diversity, equity, inclusion, this is our chance. So thank you again for joining us today.